I'm Thomas. I'm 60 years old. I thought betrayal was something that happened to other people, not to a man who gave his whole life to his family, but one forgotten security camera exposed a truth I was never meant to see. What I found that night destroyed my marriage, shattered my family, and revealed a secret far worse than infidelity. Before I tell you everything, like this story and subscribe, because what you're about to hear changed me forever. It still feels strange to write that sentence, because in my head I'm not 60. In my head I'm the same man who carried his newborn son through the front door like a trophy and swore I'd build a life so stable that nothing could ever crack it. In my head I'm the same husband who believed that if you worked hard, stayed loyal, and kept your promises, the world would return the favor. But the world doesn't return favors, it takes. Quietly. Patiently. One small piece at a time, until you look around and realize you've been living inside a life that no longer belongs to you. People like to say you can feel betrayal coming, like the air changes before a storm. That you notice the tension in conversations, the strange pauses, the way someone stops meeting your eyes. Maybe that's true for younger men. Maybe they still have the energy to read the signs. At 60, you don't read signs, you explain them away. You tell yourself your wife is tired, that she's stressed, that your children are busy, that your friends drift because everyone drifts. You tell yourself it's normal for a marriage to get quieter after 3 decades. You tell yourself silence is peace. That was my greatest mistake. My life, from the outside, looked like something solid. The kind of life people nodded at approvingly when they heard about it. 32 years married. 2 adult kids. A comfortable house in a neighborhood where people still waved when they backed out of their driveways. A career I could be proud of. Retirement that didn't feel like failure, but like a gentle exhale after a long climb. I had built buildings for a living, actual structures of steel and concrete, but the thing I was proudest of was the invisible structure, the family I believed I had protected. Linda and I met when we were both young enough to think love was a guarantee. She was quick-witted, sharp, the kind of woman who could make strangers laugh in a grocery store line. I was steadier, quieter, the kind of man who needed time to decide what he felt. She liked that about me. At least, she said she did. We married before we had money, before we had anything resembling a plan. We lived in a cramped apartment with a kitchen you could cross in 4 steps. When we had Mark, my hands shook the first time I held him. Linda noticed and smiled, like she found it endearing. When Emily came along 4 years later, I thought, this is it. This is the story. The rest of my life will be about keeping them safe. And for a long time, it was. Mark grew into a tall, restless man with my jawline and Linda's stubbornness. Emily grew into a thoughtful woman with bright eyes and a quiet intelligence that made me proud every time she spoke. They moved out, made lives of their own, visited on holidays, called less than Linda wished they would. That was normal. That was life. Linda and I learned how to fill our days again, or so I believed. The truth is, I didn't notice the change at first because it happened in such small increments that it felt like aging. Like the natural slowing of a long marriage, Linda stopped talking about her day in detail. She gave me summaries instead, like the kind you'd give a coworker you didn't want to invite into your personal life. Fine. Busy. Same old. She started taking calls outside. At first I thought it was polite. Why subject me to long conversations with her sister or her friends? But then I noticed she didn't take every call outside. Only certain ones. She began protecting her phone like it held state secrets. If I walked into the room while she was scrolling, the screen would tilt away. If a message came in, she'd tap it away too quickly for me to see who it was. If I asked what she was smiling about, she'd say, just something funny, but she didn't offer to share it, and I didn't push. That's what men like me do. We don't push. We don't ask for proof of love. We don't demand reassurance. We assume it exists the way gravity exists. Somewhere along the line, Linda started staying out later. She said she was meeting friends. She said she was helping with a charity committee. She said she needed space to breathe. I nodded. when you've been married over 3 decades, you learn which battles are worth fighting and which ones only drain you. At least, that's what I told myself. That I was being mature. That I was respecting her. If I'm honest, part of me feared the alternative, that if I asked too many questions, I'd hear answers I couldn't bear. The neighborhood itself was quiet, the kind of place where nothing dramatic happened. But one afternoon, a string of petty thefts hit the area. Someone stealing packages. Someone checking car doors at night. One neighbor claimed they saw a shadowy figure near their garage. People got jumpy. A neighborhood group chat sprang to life like it had been waiting years for a reason to exist. Everyone suddenly had theories and blurry photos. Linda was the one who said, maybe we should get cameras. It surprised me, she'd never been big on the idea of being recorded. In the past, she'd complained about how everything felt monitored in the modern world. But that day, she said it casually, as if it was no bigger decision than buying a new kettle. We've got enough stuff worth protecting, she added. And it would make me feel better. I agreed, partly because it seemed practical. And partly because I was relieved she cared about something that affected us both, so I installed them myself, not because I couldn't afford a professional, but because I liked having my hands on things. Retirement left me restless sometimes. I missed the satisfaction of building something and knowing exactly how it worked. I set one camera over the garage, one pointed toward the driveway, one facing the front door, and one inside, angled to cover the living room and the main hallway. Nothing invasive. No bedrooms. No bathrooms. Just the areas where, if someone broke in, I'd want to know. Linda watched me work, leaning against the doorway with her arms crossed. You're enjoying this? She said, it's something to do, I answered. She nodded, but I noticed her eyes lingering on the indoor camera longer than they did on the others. Is that necessary? She asked lightly. It's just the main area, I said. If someone gets in, I want to know. Okay, she said. And that was it. At the time, I took that okay as trust. Now I wonder if it was calculation. The system came with an app. Simple enough. Motion detection alerts. Live feed. Cloud storage if you paid extra. I paid extra, because I always paid extra for safety. For redundancy. For the idea that if something went wrong, I could fix it. I tested the cameras obsessively the first week. Walked past them just to see if the alerts came through. Adjusted angles. Checked night vision. Felt a small, foolish sense of pride when everything worked. Linda teased me for it. You're like a kid with a new toy, she said one evening, sitting on the couch with her legs tucked under her. It's security, I corrected, but I was smiling. She smiled back, and for a moment, it felt like the old days. Like our life was still simple enough to joke about. That moment didn't last. As the weeks went on, the neighborhood thefts slowed. People stopped posting in the group chat. The cameras became background noise, like smoke detectors. You forget they're there until you need them. I forgot, too, or at least I thought I did. The first time I used the cameras for something other than curiosity was completely ordinary. We were away for the weekend, visiting Mark and his wife. Linda insisted on staying the night at their place, which we rarely did, and she seemed almost eager about it. I checked the camera feed once, just to make sure everything looked fine. The driveway was empty. The front porch was quiet. The living room sat still and dim under the lamp we'd left on. Nothing normal. I should have closed the app right then and enjoyed the weekend. Instead, my thumb swiped to the timeline, and I scrolled back, just a few hours, because I'd never fully shaken the habit of checking, and that's when I saw it, a blur of movement in the living room, not a thief. Not a shadow passing outside. Someone inside my house. At first, my mind refused to process it. It suggested impossible explanations, a glitch, a reflection, a delayed clip. I stared at the screen until my eyes watered, then I rewound it. The footage sharpened into something unmistakable. Linda. She was standing in our living room, but she wasn't supposed to be there. She was supposed to be upstairs in Mark's guest room, asleep beside me. I looked up from the phone, across the dark guest room, at the shape of my wife under the blanket, the rise and fall of her breathing. the familiar outline. My stomach dropped, because if Linda was on the camera, who was lying beside me, my hand shook as I zoomed in on the footage. The woman on the screen moved with Linda's posture, Linda's gestures, the same small habit of pushing hair behind her ear. She walked across the living room like she owned it, then she looked directly toward the camera, and for a fraction of a second, her face turned enough for the light to catch her cheekbone. It was Linda. My brain split in two, one half tried to rationalize. Maybe the footage was old. Maybe the timestamp was wrong. Maybe I'd accidentally pulled up a clip from earlier in the week. The other half, the part that knew the truth before I did, whispered a single sentence that made my chest tighten. She lied to you. I checked the timestamp. It was from 15 minutes ago. 15 minutes ago, my wife had been in our living room, and now she was here, beside me, breathing softly in the dark. I felt cold all over, like someone had poured ice water down my spine. My fingers fumbled on the screen as I rewound again and again, watching her enter, watching her glance around, watching her move like she was waiting for someone. Then the footage showed her walking to the front door. She unlocked it, she opened it, and she stepped back, holding it open as if expecting a guest. The camera angle didn't capture the porch clearly enough to show who stood outside, but I saw a figure move into frame, a man, tall, confident, familiar in a way that made my throat tighten. He stepped into my house like he'd done it before. Linda closed the door behind him, and the clip ended. I sat frozen on the edge of the bed, phone glowing in my hand, my heart pounding so loud I was sure it would wake the whole house. Beside me, the woman I'd called my wife for 32 years shifted slightly under the blanket and sighed in her sleep. I stared at her, then back at the screen. My mind did something strange in that moment. It tried to protect me. It said, maybe it's not what you think, maybe she's planning a surprise, maybe he's fixing something, maybe, but the truth was already digging its nails into me, because Linda hadn't looked surprised in the footage. She'd looked prepared, and that man hadn't walked like a stranger, he'd walked like someone who belonged. I lowered the phone slowly, as if any sudden movement might shatter the fragile illusion of normalcy around me. I didn't sleep after that. I lay there with my eyes open, listening to Linda breathe, listening to the silence of a house that suddenly felt like a stage set around me. At some point near dawn, my phone vibrated again. Another motion alert, from the living room camera. My hand tightened around the device as I stared at the notification, feeling something primal and terrible rise inside me, because whatever was happening in my house, it was still happening. And I was about to see more than I could survive. I didn't open the notification right away. That might sound strange, but when you're 60 years old and your entire life has just tilted sideways, your body reacts before your mind does. My thumb hovered over the screen, trembling slightly. My heart was beating too fast, too heavy, like it was trying to escape my chest. Beside me, Linda shifted again. A soft exhale. The same woman who had shared my bed for 3 decades. The same woman whose hand I had held in hospital waiting rooms. The same woman who once cried when Mark left for college, or at least I thought she was the same woman. The phone buzzed again. Another motion alert. Living room camera, motion detected, 3:42 a.m., no one should have been there. We were over an hour away, in our son's house. The house we built, the house I paid off with 30 years of early mornings and late nights, was supposed to be empty, unless it wasn't. I slid carefully out of bed, trying not to disturb Linda. My legs felt weak, like I'd stood up too quickly. I stepped into the hallway of Mark's house, closing the guest room door behind me with a soft click. The glow from my phone was the only light. I opened the app, the live feed loaded slowly, agonizingly. A spinning circle. A delay that felt intentional, like the universe was giving me one last chance to close it and pretend I'd imagined everything. Then the image sharpened, my living room, the lamp still on, the couch, the coffee table, and 2 figures standing near the hallway, Linda, and the man. This time, the angle was clearer. He wasn't just a silhouette. He wasn't just a blur. I knew that posture. That slight forward lean. That way of standing with one hand in his pocket like he was perpetually relaxed. My stomach dropped so hard I had to brace my hand against the wall. David Collins, my friend of 20 years, the man who had toasted at my retirement party. The man who had hugged me and said, "You've earned the easy life, Tom." The man who had sat at my dinner table more times than I could count. He was in my house, at 3:42 in the morning, with my wife. I turned up the volume, the audio crackled faintly through the speaker. The system wasn't designed for surveillance-level clarity, but it was enough. Sure he won't check. David's voice, casual. Calm. Linda laughed softly. A sound I hadn't heard in a long time. He barely looks at the cameras anymore, she said. He was obsessed the first week. Now he forgets they exist. My throat closed. I hadn't forgotten, not tonight. David stepped closer to her. Too close. The kind of close that erases all plausible explanations. You're certain? He asked. Yes, she said. He's with Mark. He won't be back until tomorrow afternoon. The words hit me like a physical blow. She had planned this. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't a mistake. This was scheduled. David reached up and brushed a strand of hair from her face. The intimacy of the gesture made something inside me snap. I felt heat flood my body, anger, humiliation, disbelief, so intense it blurred my vision. They kissed, not awkwardly. Not hesitantly, like people who had done it many times before. I couldn't breathe. 32 years of marriage reduced to a silent, grainy live stream in my shaking hand. I don't remember sliding down the wall, but suddenly I was sitting on the hallway floor in my son's house, staring at the screen while my wife betrayed me in real time. Part of me wanted to scream. To burst back into the bedroom, wake her up, force her to explain how she could be in two places at once, but she wasn't in two places. She had never come here. Slowly, with a kind of creeping horror, I realized the shape under the blanket in the guest room wasn't Linda at all. My mind had filled in the details in the dark. I had assumed, because I wanted to assume. I stood up abruptly and walked back to the guest room. My pulse was roaring in my ears. I pushed the door open. The bed was empty, the blankets arranged carefully to mimic the shape of a body, pillows stacked beneath the comforter. For a moment, I thought I might faint. She had staged it. She had left after I fell asleep, driven back home, let him in, and trusted that I would never look. The humiliation of it was almost worse than the betrayal. She didn't just think I wouldn't check. She was certain of it. I looked around the room like it might offer some alternate explanation. Maybe she'd gone to the bathroom. Maybe she'd gone downstairs for water, but her purse was gone, her overnight bag was gone, her shoes were gone. She hadn't planned to come back before morning. I walked downstairs on autopilot. Mark's house was quiet, peaceful. A family home. A place I once believed was built on trust. I stepped outside into the cold night air. My breath fogged in front of me. I could drive back. It would take an hour. I could walk into that house and confront them while they were still there. The image flashed in my mind, bursting through the door, catching them in the act, forcing them to face me. But then what? A shouting match. Violence. Police. At 60 years old, I wasn't going to throw punches in my own living room. I wasn't going to reduce myself to something reckless and desperate. Instead, I did something that surprises me even now. I went back inside. I sat at the kitchen table, and I watched. For nearly 2 hours, I watched my wife and my friend move through my house like it belonged to them. They talked in low voices. They laughed. At one point, Linda poured wine into 2 glasses, the bottle I'd been saving for our anniversary next month. They sat on the couch together. David leaned back like he owned the place. Linda rested her head on his shoulder. I memorized everything, not because I wanted to torture myself, but because something cold and methodical had begun forming inside me. Shock was turning into clarity. This wasn't just a moment of weakness. It wasn't a drunken mistake. It was comfort. Routine. Familiarity, which meant it had been happening for a while. I rewound the timeline, scrolled back. 2 days ago, motion at 11:17 p.m., David entering again. 3 days before that, same pattern. Different times. Same outcome. My hand steadied as I watched clip after clip. This wasn't new, this was established. I felt like an archaeologist excavating the ruins of my own life, brushing away layers of illusion to reveal something rotten underneath. At 5:58 a.m., David left, Linda walked him to the door. They kissed again. She stood there for a moment after he disappeared down the driveway, as if savoring the quiet, then she closed the door. She turned toward the hallway camera. For a split second, she looked directly into it, and she smiled, not warmly, not lovingly, but knowingly, as if she was amused by something, as if she believed she was untouchable. The smile vanished just as quickly. She walked out of frame. Minutes later, I saw her pick up her purse. She left the house, heading back here, to crawl into a bed she had carefully staged, to lie beside me and pretend. I shut off the phone. The sun was beginning to rise outside Mark's kitchen window, casting pale light across the floor. I felt older than 60, I felt ancient, the kind of ancient that comes from realizing the foundation beneath your feet isn't solid stone, it's glass, and it's already cracked. Upstairs, I heard the faint sound of a car door closing. My heart thudded once, hard. She was back. I stayed seated at the table as the front door opened quietly. Soft footsteps moved through the hallway. She was trying not to wake anyone, trying not to wake me. I heard her pause outside the guest room. A small rustle. The door opening, silence, then the faint creak of the bed as she slipped back under the covers. I remained in the kitchen, staring at nothing. The man I had been 24 hours ago was gone. In his place sat someone colder. Someone more alert, someone who now understood that the betrayal wasn't theoretical, it wasn't suspicion, it was recorded, stored, time-stamped, and it was only the beginning, because as devastating as it was to see my wife with another man, something about the way they spoke, the way they moved, the way she smiled at that camera, told me this story went deeper than an affair. And I had just opened the first door. I didn't go back upstairs right away. I stayed at the kitchen table long enough for the sky to turn from gray to pale blue. Long enough for birds to begin their morning noise. Long enough for my breathing to slow into something that didn't sound like panic. Shock has a strange aftertaste. It isn't loud forever. It settles into something quieter. Heavier. I wasn't crying, I wasn't even shaking anymore, I was thinking. When I finally stood, my knees felt stiff, like I'd aged another decade in a single night. I walked upstairs slowly and opened the guest room door. Linda was on her side, facing away from the door. The blankets rose and fell gently. Her overnight bag sat beside the dresser again, positioned exactly where it had been the night before. She'd thought of everything. I stepped closer to the bed and looked down at her. The back of her neck. The familiar curve of her shoulder. The small scar near her collarbone from a kitchen accident 20 years ago. I wondered how long she had been lying to me, weeks, months, years. Her eyes fluttered open as if she sensed me there. Oh, she said softly, stretching like someone waking from deep sleep. You're up early. I studied her face carefully. There was no panic. No guilt. No flicker of concern, just ease. Couldn't sleep, I replied. She pushed herself up onto one elbow. You okay? That question nearly made me laugh. I'm fine, I said. She watched me for a moment, as if measuring something. Then she nodded and swung her legs over the side of the bed. I'm going to shower, she said. Then maybe we can head back home early. I miss our bed. Our bed, the phrase hung in the air like smoke. I nodded again and left the room before my expression betrayed me. The drive home was quiet. Linda chatted lightly about Mark's job, about Emily's upcoming visit next month, about how nice it was to spend time with family. Her voice sounded normal, too normal. I answered when necessary. Short sentences. Neutral tone. She didn't seem to notice, or maybe she noticed and didn't care. When we pulled into our driveway, I felt something tighten in my chest. The house looked exactly the same as it always had. The lawn trimmed. The curtains drawn. The front porch undisturbed. If someone had walked by, they would have seen a stable, peaceful home. I parked the car and turned off the engine. Linda reached for the door handle, but I spoke first. Did you sleep well? I asked. She paused, hand still on the handle. Yeah, she said. Why? No reason, I replied. You seemed restless. She shrugged lightly. New bed. You know how it is. I held her gaze for 2 seconds longer than usual. she smiled faintly and stepped out of the car. Inside the house, nothing looked out of place. But I saw everything differently now: the couch where they'd Saturday, the wine glasses she'd washed and put away, the bottle back in its place, slightly lower than before. She walked through the living room as if she'd never left it. "I'm going to unpack," she said, heading toward the bedroom. I remained standing near the hallway camera. I looked up at it, small, black, silent. Witness: Linda had been right about one thing: I had stopped checking it regularly. After the first few weeks, the novelty faded. The neighborhood settled. I trusted routine again. She must have noticed that. She must have waited. I pulled out my phone and opened the app again. This time standing directly beneath the camera that had recorded her. The timeline stretched back weeks. I scrolled. 2 weeks ago, motion at 10:52 p.m., David entering. 3 weeks ago, 1:14 a.m., 4 weeks ago, 8:03 p.m., earlier than usual. I clicked into that clip. Linda opened the door. David stepped in. But this time, instead of heading straight to the couch, they stood in the hallway, talking. I turned up the volume and leaned closer. "That we need to be careful," Linda was saying. "We are," David replied. "He's not stupid," she said. A short silence. "He's predictable," David corrected. Linda laughed quietly. That laugh again. I felt something sharp twist inside me. Predictable. 32 years of being dependable, steady, consistent, and that's what I'd become. Predictable. I kept watching. Linda walked toward the dining table and picked up a folder I recognized. It was blue, slightly worn at the edges. We kept important documents in it. Insurance papers. Mortgage information. Property taxes. She handed it to David. "What is she doing?" I whispered to myself. David opened the folder and flipped through pages. "Once this is signed, it's simple," he said. "Signed?" My mind started racing. I paused the clip and zoomed in. The image wasn't crystal clear, but I could make out papers spread across the table. Linda pointed at something. "I told him it was a refinance update," she said. "He didn't even read it." My blood ran cold. Refinance. I had signed refinance documents 6 months ago. Or at least I thought they were refinance documents. Linda had handled most of it. She said interest rates were favorable. She said it would lower our monthly payments. I trusted her. I had barely skimmed the paperwork. "He trusts you," David said on the recording. Linda didn't answer. That silence was worse than any confession. I fast-forwarded. They sat closer together now, heads bent over the documents. David slid a paper across the table. "You'll need his signature on this one too," he said. "I'll handle it," Linda replied. Handle it? The room felt smaller. I walked slowly toward the dining table and stared at it, imagining that exact scene unfolding where I now stood. The realization settled like cement in my chest. This wasn't just an affair, this was something else, something strategic, something planned. I went to my office and opened the filing cabinet. The refinance paperwork was in the second drawer. I pulled it out and laid it across my desk. My signature was there, Thomas A. Mercer, but the more I looked at it, the more something felt off. It was my handwriting, but it wasn't written with my usual pen. The ink tone was slightly darker. My mind tried to reject the thought forming. No, she wouldn't, would she? I returned to the camera footage and skipped forward to the end of that clip. David closed the folder. "Once this goes through, it's done," he said, "and he won't suspect." Linda asked. "He never suspects," David replied. They both smiled. I stared at the frozen image of their faces, the ease, the confidence, the certainty that I would remain blind. A strange calm spread over me then, not forgiveness, not denial, clarity. They weren't just meeting in secret, they were moving pieces on a board I didn't know I was playing on. I checked the bank app next, scrolling through recent transactions. At first, everything looked normal: utilities, groceries, insurance. Then I noticed a transfer I didn't recognize, $18,500, 2 months ago, destination account unfamiliar. I clicked into it. Another transfer, $12,000, 3 weeks later. My breathing slowed again, but this time not from shock, from calculation. I wasn't a reckless man. I never had been, and that might have been my greatest strength now. I took screenshots of everything, bank statements, camera footage, transaction confirmations. I emailed copies to a new, private email address I created in that moment, not because I wanted revenge, but because I understood something fundamental now: if they were capable of this, they were capable of more. Linda's footsteps echoed faintly down the hallway. She appeared in the doorway of my office, towel wrapped around her hair. "What are you doing?" she asked casually. "Just organizing paperwork," I replied without looking up. She stepped inside and leaned against the doorframe. "You've been distant today." I met her eyes. "Have I?" She studied me carefully, searching for cracks. "You sure you're okay?" she asked. There it was again, the performance. "I'm fine," I said evenly. She nodded slowly. "Well, I'm going to run out for a bit. Need to pick up a few things." "Of course you do," I thought. "Okay," I said. She hesitated. For a fraction of a second, I saw something flicker across her face. Uncertainty, doubt, then it vanished. She grabbed her purse and left. The front door closed. I waited 30 seconds. Then I opened the camera app. She stepped onto the driveway. A car pulled up almost immediately. David's car. She got in. They drove away together, in broad daylight. No urgency, no fear. That's when I realized something that chilled me more than anything I'd seen so far. They weren't worried about getting caught. Because in their minds, I was already defeated, predictable, passive, blind. I set my phone down slowly. They thought they knew me. They thought I would crumble quietly. They thought I would accept whatever version of reality they fed me. And for 32 years, maybe I would have, but as I stood alone in my office, staring at the evidence of my own betrayal, I understood something they didn't. I wasn't broken yet, and I hadn't even begun to respond. I didn't follow them. That thought crossed my mind, grabbing my keys, trailing their car at a distance like some desperate husband in a bad television drama. But that wasn't who I was. And more importantly, that wasn't who I needed to be. If this was bigger than an affair, and I was now certain it was, then emotion would only make me sloppy. So instead of chasing them, I did something far more dangerous. I started digging. I sat back down at my desk and pulled up every financial account I had access to. Retirement funds. Joint savings. Checking. Investment portfolios. Even an old brokerage account David himself had once convinced me to open years ago. At first glance, everything looked steady, balanced, orderly, but order can be manufactured. I changed the view settings to show a full 12-month history instead of the default 3. That's when the pattern emerged. Small transfers at first, $3,200, $5,750. Amounts just under the threshold that would trigger automatic alerts, then larger ones, $18,500, $12,000, $9,000, always labeled vaguely. Account adjustment, external settlement, investment reallocation. The receiving account numbers were partially masked, but consistent, the same destination. I felt something inside me shift, not rage, not panic, but precision. This wasn't impulse, this was staged extraction, and David worked in financial consulting. He understood exactly how to move money without raising suspicion. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. How long had they been siphoning from the life I built? 6 months, a year, more. My phone buzzed. A message from Linda. "Be back in a few hours. Don't forget we're having dinner with Carol and Steve on Thursday." Red heart, a heart emoji. My chest tightened, but not from sadness, from clarity. She was still maintaining the illusion, still assuming I was standing exactly where she left me, trusting. Unaware, docile, I typed back, "Of course. Drive safe." Predictable. I opened the camera timeline again and went further back. 2 months, 3, 4. The visits weren't random, they followed a rhythm. Usually when I was out with Mark, or at the gym, or volunteering, they had mapped my schedule, they had used my routines, and the more I scrolled, the more something else became clear. The early visits were shorter, quieter, less physical, more conversation, more paperwork. Then gradually, intimacy, comfort, confidence. This had evolved. It had started as something deliberate, strategic, and then turned personal. I paused on a clip from 5 months ago. Linda and David standing near the dining table. "No more delays," David was saying. "If we wait too long, it complicates everything." I know, Linda replied. But I need to make sure he doesn't suspect anything. He won't, David said. You've handled him for 30 years. Handled, the word echoed inside my skull, handled, like I was a project, like I was an obstacle, like I wasn't a person at all. I closed my eyes for a moment and tried to steady my breathing. There's a specific kind of humiliation that comes when you realize someone doesn't just betray you, they underestimate you, and that humiliation can turn into something powerful if you let it. I opened a new document on my computer and began creating a timeline. Dates, transfers, camera recordings, conversations, cross-referenced, labeled, organized. If they wanted to treat my life like a transaction, then I would audit it. 2 hours passed without me noticing. When I finally looked at the clock, it was nearly noon. Linda hadn't returned yet. I checked the driveway camera, empty. Then, 15 minutes later, motion, her car pulled in. David's car followed behind for a moment before driving past. They weren't even trying to be discreet anymore. Linda stepped out, adjusting her sunglasses. She looked relaxed, happy. I watched through the live feed as she walked toward the door. For a split second, she paused beneath the hallway camera again. Her gaze flicked upward. She knew it was there. She had always known. The door opened. She stepped inside. I minimized the app and remained seated at my desk. Her footsteps approached. Tom. She called lightly, in here. She entered with 2 shopping bags in her hands, picked up a few things, she said casually. Also stop for coffee. I nodded. She placed the bags on the chair and walked closer. You've been in here all morning? Just organizing finances, I replied evenly. She stiffened, barely, but I saw it. Oh. She said, forcing a small smile. Why? I realized I haven't reviewed things properly since we refinanced. There it was, the test. Her eyes sharpened for a fraction of a second. Then softened. Everything's fine, she said quickly. You worry too much. Probably, I answered. Silence settled between us, thick. She stepped closer to my desk and glanced at the paperwork. What are you looking for exactly? She asked. Clarity. That word lingered. Her fingers tapped lightly on the desk. You trust me, don't you? There it was. The question wasn't defensive, it was strategic. I looked up at her. 32 years, wrinkles at the corners of her eyes I had once kissed, lines on her forehead I had memorized. I did, I said quietly. She blinked. What does that mean? It means I never thought I needed to check. Her breathing changed slightly. Not dramatically, but enough. She forced a laugh. You're being dramatic, Thomas. Thomas. She only used my full name when she wanted control. I'm just being careful, I said calmly. She stared at me for several seconds, trying to read me, trying to assess how much I knew, trying to decide whether to pivot. Then she smiled again. Well, don't drive yourself crazy. Everything's under control. Control, interesting choice of words. She leaned down and kissed my cheek, the same lips that had kissed David less than 12 hours ago. I'm going to lie down, she said softly. Didn't sleep much last night. Neither did I. After she left the room, I sat motionless. Then I opened the audio settings for the camera system. There was an option I hadn't enabled before, extended cloud storage, longer retention, automatic backups. I upgraded the plan. If they thought I had stopped paying attention, they were wrong. I went further. I adjusted notification settings, enabled silent alerts that wouldn't display visibly on my main screen. I turned off the audible chime that might tip her off. Then I did something else. I checked the title records for our house online, public access portal. It took some searching. When the document finally loaded, my pulse slowed into something dangerously steady. Ownership status had changed 3 months ago, from joint tenancy to tenancy in common, and one additional name appeared beneath ours. David Collins. My hands went cold. He had partial legal claim, on my house. Without my knowledge, I stared at the screen for a long time. This wasn't a romance. This wasn't midlife crisis passion. This was acquisition. They weren't just sleeping together. They were repositioning assets, preparing an exit, preparing to leave me with. What? Embarrassment, debt, an empty house no longer fully mine. Footsteps approached again. Linda stood in the doorway, watching me, "You look pale," she said softly. I turned the monitor slightly so she couldn't see it clearly, "just tired." She studied me longer this time. There was something different in her gaze now. A flicker of concern, not guilt, not remorse, concern that the variable had shifted, concern that I might not be as predictable as she thought. "You sure everything's okay?" She asked again. I met her eyes, and for the first time in 32 years, I didn't look away. "I'm starting to see things more clearly," I said. Her smile faltered, just slightly. "What things?" she asked. I held her gaze for 3 seconds longer than comfortable. "Patterns," I replied. Silence stretched between us, heavy, testing, measuring, and in that silence, I saw it. For the first time since this began, she wasn't completely certain of me anymore, and that uncertainty, that was the first crack. Linda didn't respond immediately. She stood there, studying my face as if she were trying to calculate how far the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "Patterns?" she repeated lightly. "You sound like a detective." "Maybe I should have been," I said. The air in the room changed, not dramatically. Not explosively, just enough to register. She crossed her arms loosely. A defensive gesture disguised as casual posture. "Thomas," she said carefully, "if this is about money, we've already discussed the refinance." It was necessary. Necessary for what? I asked. Her jaw tightened. "For stability." Stability, the word almost made me smile. "I always thought we were stable," I replied. She didn't answer that. Instead, she shifted tactics. "You've been restless since retiring," she said. "You need something to focus on. That's all this is." There it was again, minimize. Redirect. Diagnose me instead of addressing the facts. For 32 years, that strategy had worked, but something fundamental had changed in me overnight. "I saw the title update," I said evenly. Her eyes froze, just for a fraction of a second. "But I saw it, title update." She repeated, "David's name," I continued. "On our house." The silence that followed wasn't confusion, it was recalculation. She walked slowly into the room and closed the door behind her. That was new, now we were contained. "That was a temporary adjustment," she said. "For investment leverage." "Investment leverage," I echoed. "Yes," she said quickly. "It's complicated." "I'm sure it is." Her breathing became slightly shallower. "You signed the documents," she added. I leaned back in my chair. "Did I?" Another pause. "Of course you did," she said. "You were there." I held her gaze without blinking. "That's interesting," I said softly, "because I don't remember agreeing to partial ownership transfer." Her lips parted slightly. "You don't remember a lot of financial details," she said. "You've always left that to me." Left it to her, trusted her. That had been my mistake. "Why David?" I asked quietly. She didn't answer immediately. "He was facilitating the refinancing structure," she said at last. "It required temporary equity positioning." Temporary, everything was temporary when you didn't intend to explain it later. I stood up slowly, not aggressively, just enough to shift the dynamic. "I reviewed the transfers too," I said. Her eyes sharpened. "What transfers?" "The ones labeled external settlement." Her face remained composed, impressively composed. "You're overreacting," she said. "I haven't reacted at all," I replied calmly. That unsettled her more than shouting would have, because she was prepared for anger, she was prepared for accusation, she wasn't prepared for stillness. "Thomas," she said, softening her tone, stepping closer, "you're creating problems where there aren't any." "Am I?" "Yes." "Then explain them." She hesitated. That hesitation was louder than any confession. "Financial restructuring takes time," she said. "And discretion." "Discretion," I repeated. "Yes." I stepped closer to her now, close enough to see the faint pulse in her neck. "Is that what last night was?" I asked quietly. "Discretion." Her body went rigid. For a second, she didn't breathe. "What are you talking about?" she asked, but her voice was thinner now. "I was awake," I said. Her eyes searched mine desperately. "You weren't in bed," I continued. She swallowed. "You must have been dreaming." I watched the footage, I said. That was it, the moment, the exact second the illusion fractured, her face drained of color, not dramatically, just enough. What footage? She whispered. The living room camera, I replied. Silence filled the room like water rising. I watched her carefully. Shock, fear, then calculation. How much did you see? She asked. There it was, not denial, not outrage, assessment. Enough, I said. She stepped back as if the floor had shifted beneath her. This isn't what you think, she began. It rarely is, I replied. Her hands trembled slightly now. He came over to talk, she said quickly. About the house. At 3 in the morning. It was easier when you weren't here. That sentence echoed between us. Easier when you weren't here, so I'm an inconvenience, I said. That's not what I meant. But it's what you said. She ran a hand through her hair, pacing now. You don't understand the pressure I've been under. What pressure? The financial pressure, she snapped. You think retirement just works itself out? You think stability maintains itself? I stared at her. We had over 800,000 in combined assets, I said calmly. What pressure? Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. You've always been naive about money, she said finally. That was new. She had never spoken to me like that before, not openly. Is that what you told David? I asked quietly. Her head jerked up. You've been listening to private conversations? They weren't private, I said. They were in my house. She laughed suddenly, sharp, almost hysterical. You installed cameras, she said. You invaded your own privacy. I held her gaze. You suggested the cameras. That stopped her. Her chest rose and fell rapidly now. You've been spying on me, she said, shifting blame again. I've been observing my home. You don't trust me. That sentence was almost amusing. I trusted you completely, I replied. That's how we got here. Her eyes filled with something, not tears. Frustration. You're blowing this out of proportion, she insisted. Am I? Yes. You transferred $39,000 to an external account. That was temporary. You added David to the house title. That was strategic. You kissed him on my couch. Silence, thick, absolute. She looked at me then, not as a husband, not as a partner, but as an obstacle that had just become self-aware. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, she said quietly. There it was, not apology, not remorse, logistical disappointment. How was it supposed to happen? I asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she sank into the chair opposite my desk and covered her face with her hands. For a moment, I almost felt sympathy. 32 years doesn't vanish cleanly, but then I remembered the smile at the camera, the word predictable, handled. How long? I asked. She lowered her hands slowly. 6 months, she whispered. The honesty startled me. Just 6. I asked. She hesitated, emotionally. Longer. Emotionally longer, of course. When did you decide I was predictable? I asked softly. Her eyes hardened slightly. When you stopped paying attention, she said. That hit somewhere deep. Stopped paying attention to what? To me, she replied. I thought about that, about the years of steady routine, work, bills, maintenance, safety. I had built stability. Maybe I had assumed stability was enough, but that doesn't explain the money, I said. Her gaze flickered again. It was security, she replied. For who? For me. There it was, the core. This wasn't passion, it wasn't romance, it was exit strategy. You were preparing to leave, I said. She didn't deny it. I needed options, she said quietly. By draining our accounts? By protecting myself. From what? I asked. She met my eyes directly now. From ending up with nothing. The irony almost made me laugh. You were going to leave me with nothing, I said. That's not true. David on the title says otherwise. She stood up abruptly. You don't understand how vulnerable I felt. She said, anger rising now. You retired. You withdrew. You became distant. And so you decided to transfer assets behind my back. I decided to secure my future. At my expense. You would have been fine, she snapped. That was the most honest thing she'd said all day. I felt something inside me settle then, a final piece clicking into place. This wasn't about love, it wasn't about loneliness, it wasn't about feeling unseen, it was about control, and they had believed I would never fight for it. Linda stared at me now, waiting for rage, for pleading, for negotiation, but I didn't give her any of it. Instead, I walked back to my desk and picked up my phone. "What are you doing?" she asked sharply. "Calling an attorney," I said calmly. Her face went white. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious." "This doesn't have to escalate," she said quickly. "It already has." She stepped toward me, panic creeping into her voice now. "Thomas, we can fix this." I looked at her, at the woman I had built a life with, at the woman who had smiled at a camera while dismantling it. "No," I said quietly. "You can't fix something you were planning to replace." The words landed between us like a closing door, and for the first time since this began, I wasn't the predictable one anymore. Linda didn't move, for a few seconds. She just stood there, staring at the phone in my hand as if it were a weapon. "You're overreacting," she said, but the confidence was gone now. The words came out thinner, strained. "Calling a lawyer makes this real." "It is real," I replied. Her jaw tightened. "It doesn't have to end like this." I looked at her carefully, interesting choice of words, and, so she had already imagined the ending. "Then tell me how it was supposed to end," I said calmly. She hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. "You were going to leave," I continued. "After the transfers were complete. After the title was secure. After you were certain you'd land comfortably." Don't. I said quietly, not loudly. Not angrily, just firmly. She stopped, because she heard something in my voice she hadn't heard before. Finality. I lowered the phone but didn't put it away. "I want the truth," I said. "All of it. No strategy. No reframing. No blaming my retirement." She stared at me for a long time, then something shifted in her posture. The performance dropped, not entirely, but enough. "We were going to restructure the house," she said slowly. "Sell it within a year. And split the equity. With David on the title. It simplified things. For you," I said. She didn't deny it. "You weren't supposed to find out like this," she repeated quietly. There it was again, logistics, timing, not remorse, just inconvenience. When was I supposed to find out? I asked. She swallowed. "After everything was finalized. So I would wake up one day and what? Discover half my assets gone and my wife moved out. You would have gotten your share. My share, of my own life." I felt something almost like exhaustion settle into my bones. "Did the kids know?" I asked. Her eyes flickered. "That flicker was answer enough, Mark." I pressed. "Not details," she said quickly. "He just knew we were having problems." "Emily." She suspected. Suspected, so I had been the last to know. Predictable, blind, handled. I walked slowly toward the hallway. Toward the camera mounted near the ceiling. Linda watched me, confused. "What are you doing?" she asked. I looked up at the device, small, silent, patient. "You suggested these," I said without looking at her. "Yes." "Why?" She didn't answer immediately. "For security," she said. "From who?" She hesitated again, then, very quietly, "From uncertainty." I turned to face her. "You mean from me?" "No, yes." Silence. Her shoulders dropped slightly. "I didn't know who you were becoming," she said. "That caught me off guard." "Who was I becoming?" I asked. "Detached," she said. "Predictable. Quiet. You stopped fighting for anything." "Fighting, I had thought peace was strength." She had interpreted it as surrender. "I worked for 40 years, I said. I built stability so we wouldn't have to fight. And then you stopped looking at me," she said. There was anger there now. Old resentment surfacing. "You stopped asking what I wanted. You stopped telling me," I replied. she laughed bitterly. I shouldn't have to beg for attention after 30 years. And I shouldn't have to monitor my bank account like a crime scene. That silenced her. For a moment, we just stood there in the wreckage of our own marriage. Then she did something unexpected. She sat down, not dramatically, just slowly, like someone realizing they were more tired than they thought. It wasn't supposed to start like this, she said quietly. How did it start? She stared at the floor, with conversations. About what? About feeling invisible. The word landed heavily. Invisible. I thought about the last few years, routine dinners, quiet evenings, her scrolling through her phone, me reading or watching television. Parallel lives under one roof. Had I been absent, maybe, but absence doesn't justify theft. David listened. She continued. Of course he did, I said. He had incentive. Her eyes flashed. It wasn't always about money. No, I agreed. Eventually it became about both. She didn't argue. I walked back to my desk and opened the property record again. I'm reversing this, I said. You can't just reverse it. Watch me. It's legally structured. So was our marriage. She closed her eyes briefly. You'll destroy everything, she whispered. I looked at her carefully. Everything was already being dismantled, I replied. Her breathing grew uneven. What do you want? She asked finally. That question hung in the air. It was the first honest one she'd asked. I thought about it. Did I want revenge, public humiliation, to expose her to the children immediately? No, what I wanted was something simpler. Control, truth, and protection. I want the full accounting, I said. Every transfer. Every document. Every signature. She hesitated. I don't have everything here. Then you'll get it. She looked toward the door, as if calculating whether she could still call David. I saw it. Call him, I said calmly. Her head snapped toward me. If you think he can fix this. She didn't move. You think I won't escalate? I asked. You wouldn't, she said reflexively. There it was again, the old assumption. I stepped closer. You're still measuring me against who I was yesterday, I said quietly. Something shifted in her expression then, a small fracture, because she could see it now. I wasn't reacting emotionally. I wasn't pleading. I wasn't collapsing. I was reorganizing, and that frightened her. You'd ruin the kids' perception of us, she said, trying a different angle. I won't lie to protect you, I replied. They don't need to know everything. They deserve to know reality. You'd humiliate me. That word almost made me smile. You humiliated me in my own living room. She flinched. Silence settled again. Then her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. The sound was sharp in the quiet house. We both looked toward it. She didn't move. Go ahead, I said. Slowly, she walked into the kitchen and picked it up. Her face changed as she read the screen. Is it him? I asked from the doorway. She didn't answer, which meant yes. She typed something quickly. Then hesitated, then deleted it, typed again. I stepped closer. Tell him I know, I said. Her hand froze. You don't need to involve him right now. He's already involved. She turned toward me, eyes wide now. Thomas. Please. Please, first time, not strategic, not manipulative, desperate, but it wasn't regret for what she'd done, it was fear of what I might do, and in that moment, something crystallized in my mind. This wasn't just about betrayal, it was about underestimation. They had built a plan assuming I would remain passive, and now the variable had changed. I walked past her and opened the front door. What are you doing? She asked quickly. I'm taking a drive. Where? To think. She followed me to the porch. Don't do anything impulsive, she said. I paused, turned to her, and held her gaze. Impulsive? I repeated softly, I've never been impulsive. She didn't answer, because she knew it was true. I stepped off the porch and walked toward the car. As I opened the driver's door, I looked back at the house, at the windows, at the roof I had paid for, at the walls that had held birthdays, arguments, laughter, and quiet evenings. It looked the same, but it wasn't mine in the way I thought it was, not anymore. As I pulled out of the driveway, I glanced at the camera mounted above the garage, still recording, still watching. For the first time since installing it, I was grateful it had been there, because without it, I might have remained predictable, blind, handled. Instead, I was awake, and somewhere inside that awakening, a new version of me was forming, one they had not prepared for. I didn't drive aimlessly, I drove with purpose. There's a difference. Aimless driving is escape. Purposeful driving is strategy. I headed downtown, toward the office of a man I hadn't spoken to in nearly 8 years, Richard Halpern. We'd played golf together a few times back when I was still working. He specialized in property and marital law. I remembered that much. I also remembered he didn't like surprises. Which meant I would give him documentation, not emotion. The drive felt longer than usual, though it was barely 30 minutes. Every red light gave my mind space to replay images from the footage, the kiss, the folder, the smile at the camera, the word predictable. By the time I parked outside Richard's office, I wasn't shaking anymore, I was focused. Inside, the receptionist looked up politely. Appointment? She asked. Thomas Mercer, I said. Tell him it's about property exposure. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. That phrasing worked. I was sitting across from Richard 15 minutes later. He looked older. Thinner. Sharper somehow. Tom, he said cautiously. You don't look like you're here for estate planning. I'm not, I replied. I placed my phone on the desk and turned it toward him. Before I say anything, I continued, I need you to look at this. He adjusted his glasses and watched. I showed him 3 clips, the property transfer document, the bank transfers, and finally, the title record with David's name listed beneath ours. Richard didn't interrupt, he didn't react emotionally, he just absorbed. When the last screen faded, he leaned back slowly. Did you authorize this? He asked. No. Did you sign documentation related to refinancing? Yes. But not ownership transfer. He nodded once. Do you have copies? Yes. Have you confronted your wife? Yes. And? She admitted partial intent to restructure assets. Richard's jaw tightened. Does David Collins have a professional relationship with you? He advised on investments years ago. Richard folded his hands together. This isn't just infidelity, he said quietly. I know. This is potential fraud. The word settled heavily in the room. Fraud, not betrayal, not marital breakdown, fraud. What are my options? I asked calmly. Richard looked at me carefully. First, he said, we secure everything. Freeze joint transfers immediately. Separate accounts. Document every communication from this moment forward. I've started. Good. Second. We issue a formal demand for accounting. And the title? That depends, he said. If your signature was obtained under misrepresentation or without full disclosure, we can challenge the transfer. And if it was forged? His eyes sharpened. Then it's criminal. Silence. I didn't flinch. What about the money already moved? I asked. If we act quickly, we may be able to freeze the receiving account. I nodded once. Do it. He studied me. You're remarkably calm. I've had a few hours to process. He gave a small, knowing nod. I'll prepare emergency filings today. I stood up. One more thing, I added. Yes. I don't want this public yet. That's understandable. I want to control the timing. Richard gave me a long look. You're not the man who walked in here 8 years ago, he said. No, I replied. I'm not. When I stepped back into the sunlight, something felt different, not lighter, but clearer. This wasn't about catching them in the act anymore, it was about reclaiming ground. I got back into the car and checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Linda, 2 messages. Where are you? We need to talk. And finally, David is asking questions. I stared at that last one. Of course he was. For months, they've been moving pieces without resistance. Now something had shifted. I typed back. Tell him to speak to my attorney. I hit send. The reply came almost instantly. You went to a lawyer? Yes. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared. Thomas, this will destroy everything. I stared at the screen, then typed slowly. You already started. I put the phone down. By the time I pulled back into the driveway, Linda was standing on the porch, waiting. She looked different now, not composed, not strategic, tense. When I stepped out of the car, she didn't greet me. "You actually went," she said. "Yes. You escalated. You transferred assets behind my back." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "David says you're overreacting legally." I almost smiled. David is not in a position to evaluate my reactions anymore. She stepped closer. "He's worried." "Good." The word landed harder than I expected. She stared at me as if seeing a stranger. "You're enjoying this," she said quietly. "No," I replied. "I'm correcting it." Her breathing quickened. "He says if you pursue fraud claims, it could implicate me." "Did you commit fraud?" Silence. That silence was answer enough. "I never meant for it to go that far," she whispered. "It already has." She ran a hand through her hair, pacing the porch. This was supposed to be controlled. "There's that word again." She stopped pacing. "What do you want from me?" she asked, voice trembling now. "I want full disclosure." "I told you." "No," I interrupted calmly. "You told me fragments." Her shoulders sagged. "The money is in a joint investment holding," she said quietly. "Under David's management." "For whose benefit?" "For transition." "Transition to what?" She hesitated. "To a separate property purchase." The words hit with surgical precision. "You already picked it?" I asked. "Yes." "How long?" 2 months. I let that settle. They had selected a new home, before informing me the old one was collapsing. "Where?" I asked. "Out of state." "Of course, clean exit, new start, with my equity funding it. Did you think I'd just sign off?" I asked. "You wouldn't have had a choice once it was finalized." There it was, the truth. Stripped of softness, for a brief moment, I felt anger rise hot and sharp, but I forced it down. Anger clouds clarity, clarity wins. "I've frozen joint accounts," I said calmly. Her face drained. "You can't do that without telling me." "I just did." "You're trapping me." "No," I said. "I'm stopping you." She looked toward the street, then back at me. "What about the kids?" she asked. "They'll know what's necessary." "You'll turn them against me." "I won't lie to protect a plan I wasn't part of." Her eyes filled finally, not from heartbreak, from loss of control. "This isn't the man I married," she whispered. "You stopped looking at him," I replied. Silence fell between us again. But this time it was different. The balance had shifted. She wasn't negotiating from superiority anymore, she was reacting, and inside that shift, I felt something steady take root. Not vengeance, not cruelty, but backbone. The man she had labeled predictable was gone, and in his place stood someone they hadn't accounted for. As we stood there on the porch of a house no longer legally secure, I realized something else. This wasn't finished, not even close, because if they had gone as far as partial ownership transfer, there were likely other pieces I hadn't uncovered yet, and I intended to find every single one. Linda didn't go back inside, she stayed on the porch. Arms wrapped around herself like the air had suddenly turned cold. "David wants to meet," she said after a long silence. I looked at her carefully. "Of course he does. He says this can be resolved privately." "Privately?" I repeated. "Yes. Without filings. Without escalation." I almost admired the audacity. For months they had moved assets in private. Rewritten ownership in private. Planned an exit in private. Now they wanted resolution in private. "No," I said. Her jaw tightened. "You won't even hear him out." "I've heard enough. He'll say you misunderstood." "I didn't misunderstand a title transfer." She exhaled sharply. "You're forcing a war." "No," I replied evenly. "I'm ending one." That silenced her. She stared at me for a long time, like she was searching for the old version of me, the one who would compromise to keep peace. He wasn't there anymore. "I need to call him," she said finally. "You can," I replied. "But put it on speaker." Her eyes widened. "You don't trust me?" The irony didn't even sting anymore. No, I said plainly. She hesitated, then pulled out her phone. For a moment I wondered if she would refuse. She didn't. She dialed. The call connected quickly. Linda. David's voice came through, tight, controlled. What's happening? He's here, she said quietly. I'm right here, I added. There was a pause. Thomas, David said, shifting tone instantly. Calm. Professional. We need to discuss this rationally. I agree, I replied. You've involved an attorney. Yes. That was premature. Transferring my equity was premature. Another pause. This is a misunderstanding, he said smoothly. The title adjustment was a temporary financial instrument. For whose benefit? For portfolio leverage. And the funds transferred? Investment positioning. In whose name? I asked. Silence. Jointly managed, he said. Answer the question. Another pause. In Linda's name. There it was, clean, clear. And when were you planning to inform me? I asked. That depends on timeline execution. He said, meaning after it was irreversible. That's unfair. No, I replied calmly. It's accurate. His voice hardened slightly. You're reacting emotionally. I'm reacting legally. That quieted him. Thomas, he tried again. If you pursue fraud allegations, it becomes messy for everyone. For everyone? I asked. Or for you? He didn't answer. Linda stood very still beside me. I could feel the tension radiating off her. We can unwind portions of this, David continued. Return transfers gradually. Adjust documentation. Gradually, adjust, words meant to soften criminal exposure. You'll provide a full accounting within 48 hours, I said. That's not how these structures. 48 hours, I repeated. Silence stretched across the line. And if I don't? He asked. Then my attorney proceeds. Another pause. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, colder. You're making a mistake. No, I said quietly. You did. I nodded toward Linda. She ended the call. The silence afterward felt enormous. He's scared, she said. So are you. She didn't deny it. You're blowing up 32 years, she whispered. I looked at her carefully. No, I said. You did that 6 months ago. That hit. She turned away. For the first time since this began, she looked uncertain, not strategic, not manipulative, but genuinely unsure of her footing. And that's when I realized something important. For months, they had operated from advantage. Now they were reacting, and people make mistakes when they react. I went inside and walked straight to my office. Linda followed. What are you doing now? She asked, securing the rest. I logged into every account again, changed passwords, enabled multi-factor authentication, removed Linda's secondary authorization from 2 smaller accounts. Her breathing quickened. You can't just cut me out. I can prevent further transfers. You're punishing me. No, I said calmly. I'm protecting myself. She watched silently as I worked. The dynamic had completely inverted. 6 hours ago. I was the last to know. Now I was the one moving pieces. Was it ever about him? I asked suddenly. She stiffened. What? David. She hesitated. It started as conversation. That's not what I asked. She looked down at the floor. Yes, she said quietly. Eventually. The honesty felt almost surgical. When? I asked, after the first transfer. Interesting. Money first, emotion second. So the affair grew out of the plan, I said. She didn't respond, which meant yes. That realization settled heavily. This hadn't been romance that spiraled into financial chaos. It had been strategy that evolved into intimacy. And that difference mattered. My phone buzzed. A message from Richard. Preliminary filing submitted. Accounts flagged. Title challenge initiated. Fast, efficient. I showed Linda the screen. Her face drained. You actually filed, she whispered. Yes. She sank into the chair behind her. This is real now, she said. It always was. She covered her face with her hands. For a moment, I saw something I hadn't expected, not manipulation, not calculation, fear, not of losing me, but of losing security, losing control, losing the plan. Did you love him? I asked quietly. She lowered her hands slowly. I don't know, she said. That might have been the most honest answer of the day. And me? I asked, her eyes filled. Yes, she whispered, but not enough to stay without leverage. She flinched. I was afraid, she said. Of what? Of aging, she admitted softly. Of depending entirely on someone who had stopped looking at me. That landed somewhere deeper than I expected. For a brief moment, the anger faded, replaced by something heavier. 32 years of shared life doesn't dissolve cleanly into villain and victim. There are fractures on both sides, but fractures don't justify betrayal. You should have told me you were afraid, I said. I did, she whispered, not like this. She didn't argue. We sat in silence for several minutes, then her phone buzzed again. This time she didn't even look at it. He's panicking, she said. He should be. She looked at me differently now, not as predictable, not as passive, but as someone she no longer understood. You've changed in a day, she said quietly. No, I replied. I just stopped trusting the version of reality you built for me. That hit harder than anything else, because it was true. The house felt different now, not broken, not yet, but tense, as if every wall was holding its breath. And as I sat there, watching Linda try to process the collapse of a plan she thought was airtight, I realized something else. If they had gone this far, if they had already selected another property, if funds had already moved. Then somewhere, there were more documents, more signatures, more secrets, and I hadn't found them all yet, which meant this wasn't the end of discovery, it was only the surface, and I intended to go deeper. I didn't sleep that night. Linda stayed in the guest room, not because I asked her to, because she chose to. Distance, even symbolic, can say more than words. The house was silent, but it wasn't peaceful. It felt like a building after a structural crack, still standing, but unstable. Every small sound carried weight. Around midnight, I went back to my office. There's something clarifying about working when the world is asleep. Fewer distractions. Fewer illusions. I opened the property portal again and pulled every document tied to our address over the past 12 months, refinance agreements, equity adjustments, lien records. Most were standard. Then I found something else, a secondary filing, 3 months ago, power of attorney, limited scope authorization, my name, Linda's name, and David's. My pulse slowed, not sped up. That was new. I opened the document. It authorized temporary financial representation regarding asset restructuring and property transition. My signature was there, perfectly shaped, perfectly aligned, too perfect. I leaned back in my chair. I never signed this. The refinance paperwork, yes. This? No. I zoomed in. The digital timestamp metadata showed it had been uploaded at 11:48 p.m., on a night I distinctly remembered being home. The memory clicked into place. That evening Linda had brought paperwork to the dining table, just standard updates, she had said. I had signed 2 documents, not 3. Had she swapped pages? Had she slid something beneath the stack? My chest tightened, not with shock anymore. With realization. This hadn't been rushed, it had been layered. I stood up and walked quietly down the hallway. The guest room door was slightly ajar. Linda was awake, staring at the ceiling. She didn't look surprised to see me. Can't sleep? She asked softly. No. I stepped into the room and held up my phone. What is this? I asked. She didn't need to look, she already knew. Her breathing shifted. It was part of the refinance, she said automatically. No, I replied calmly. It wasn't. Silence. It's a limited power authorization, I continued. You gave him representation over my assets. It was temporary. You forged it. Her jaw tightened. I didn't forge anything. You inserted it. That's not the same. I stared at her. It was, legally, you manipulated consent, I said. She sat up slowly. You would have said no. Yes. And then what? She snapped. I'd be stuck. Stuck with what? With a man who stopped participating. There it was again, her justification, participation. I paid the mortgage, I said quietly. I funded the accounts. I trusted you. You checked out emotionally. And that void gave you the right to move assets. She didn't answer. Instead, she looked at me with something like desperation. I was drowning, she said. You didn't see it. I wasn't looking for fraud. I wasn't planning fraud, she insisted, you executed it. That silenced her. The house creaked faintly in the night, 32 years of shared history now compressed into this small room. Did you love him? I asked again. She closed her eyes briefly. I felt seen, she said. That answer hurt more than denial. And now? I asked. Her eyes opened. Now there was something else there, uncertainty. I don't know, she admitted. I nodded slowly. That's the most honest thing you've said. I stepped back toward the door. What happens now? She asked. I continue, I replied. Continue what? Finding everything. She stared at me. You're going to tear apart every document? Yes. You won't stop. No. Something in her expression shifted then, not anger, not manipulation, recognition. For the first time, she understood that this wasn't a temporary storm she could outwait, this was structural, permanent. You're not fighting for us, she whispered. I paused at the doorway. You stopped fighting for us when you started planning without me. That landed. I went back to my office and emailed the power of attorney document to Richard, subject line, possible unauthorized instrument. Within 10 minutes, even at that hour, he responded, do not confront further. Preserve communication. This is serious. Serious, the word felt almost understated. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. For years, I believed stability meant silence, that avoiding conflict preserved love, that consistency equaled security, but silence can look like absence, consistency can look like stagnation, and security, if not shared, can look like control. Had I withdrawn? Yes. Had I stopped asking deeper questions? Probably. But none of that justified deception. My phone vibrated, a text from an unknown number. You need to reconsider this course. David. He must have found another phone. I didn't respond. Another message came. If you escalate fraud, it implicates Linda criminally. There it was, pressure, threat disguised as concern. I typed one sentence back. Then she shouldn't have signed my name. 3 dots appeared, stopped, no reply. Good, let him sit in uncertainty. I opened the investment accounts again, digging deeper this time, hidden sub-accounts, shell holding structures. Then I saw it, an LLC registration. Filed 4 months ago, primary officer, David Collins, secondary beneficiary, Linda Mercer, purpose, real estate acquisition, my name nowhere. I felt something inside me go still, completely still. They had formed a company, before moving funds, before adjusting title, before selecting property. This wasn't reactive, this was premeditated. I saved the documentation, forwarded it to Richard. And for the first time since this began, anger surfaced cleanly, not chaotic, not explosive, cold, calculated. They hadn't just underestimated me, they had replaced me, on paper, in plans, in future projections, and I had been the funding source. I stood up and walked to the hallway camera again. Looked up at it, small, silent, witness. If not for that device, this might have unfolded quietly. One day I would have received notice, equity diluted, assets shifted, wife gone, and I would have blamed myself for not paying attention. Instead, I was awake in time, and that made all the difference. Behind me, I heard Linda step into the hallway. She stopped a few feet away. You found more, she said softly. Yes. She didn't ask what, she already knew. You're going to destroy him, she whispered. I turned slowly. He destroyed himself. And me? She asked. I held her gaze. You chose your position. Silence. Then, very quietly, was there ever a chance to fix this? I considered that carefully. Fix what? The affair, the transfers, the forged authorization, the LLC. You didn't just break trust, I said. You built an exit while sleeping beside me. Her eyes filled, but there were still no tears. because even now, she understood the difference. This wasn't emotional betrayal alone, it was strategic displacement, and that kind of fracture doesn't mend with apologies. "I never thought you'd fight like this," she said. I looked at her steadily. Neither did I, and that was the truth. Something fundamental had shifted. The predictable man was gone. In his place stood someone methodical, alert, and unwilling to be handled, and this was only the beginning of the consequences. Morning came heavy and gray, neither of us mentioned sleep. Linda made coffee like she always did. The routine felt surreal, the clink of the spoon against the mug, the hum of the machine, small domestic sounds layered over a fracture that was anything but small. I sat at the kitchen table, phone face down, waiting. At 8:12 a.m., it buzzed. "Richard, emergency injunction granted. Freeze initiated on flagged accounts. Title dispute officially filed." I read it twice, then I looked up. Linda was watching me. "It's done," I said calmly. Her hand tightened around the coffee mug. "What does that mean?" "It means no further transfers. No liquidation. No movement." Her face went pale. "You moved fast. You moved first." Silence stretched between us. "You've humiliated him," she said quietly. "I've protected myself." She stared at me as if she still expected a crack, an apology, a hesitation. It didn't come. Her phone buzzed. She didn't check it. I did. Unknown number again. "He's filing criminal exposure. Call me." "David," I ignored it. Another message. "This will damage you too." Interesting. Damage me how? Public scandal? Family embarrassment. I typed one response. "Stop texting." Then blocked the number. Linda watched that exchange with something like disbelief. "You're really cutting him off," she said. "Yes." "And me?" "That depends on what you do next." Her eyes searched mine. "For 32 years, you never gave ultimatums," she said. "I never needed to." She set the mug down slowly. "What do you want from me right now?" she asked. "Truth. In writing." She blinked. "You want a statement?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because verbal explanations shift." She stared at me. "You don't trust anything I say." "No," the word landed without anger, just fact. She inhaled slowly. "And if I refuse?" "Then I proceed assuming worst intent." Her jaw tightened. "You're treating me like a defendant. You positioned yourself like one." That silenced her. After a long pause, she nodded once. "I'll write it." She left the kitchen. I stayed seated, feeling the weight of what was happening. This wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't even emotional confrontation anymore. It was documentation, structure, containment, and somewhere inside that process, I realized something unsettling. I felt steadier now than I had in years. Not happier, but steadier, because uncertainty had been replaced by clarity, even if that clarity was brutal. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't David, it was Mark. "Dad, what's going on?" Of course, David must have reached out, or Linda had, or both. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed, "We'll talk tonight. In person." 3 dots appeared instantly. "Is this about Mom?" "Yes." Pause. "Did she tell you something?" "No," I replied. "I found it." No more explanation. He responded with a single word, "Okay." I set the phone down. This was the next fracture. The children, not children anymore, adults, but still ours. I had no intention of weaponizing them, but I wouldn't lie to protect deception. Linda returned 40 minutes later with a sheet of paper, handwritten, her handwriting. She placed it on the table without speaking. I read. It was clinical. Admitted to transferring funds for personal security. Admitted to authorizing partial property transfer under financial strategy. Admitted to forming LLC for future independent housing. Admitted to personal relationship with David, but there was one line that caught me. I believed Thomas would not contest restructuring. Believed, predictable, handled. I looked up. "Why did you believe that?" She didn't sit down. "Because you avoid conflict." "I avoid chaos," I corrected. "You avoid confrontation." "Not anymore." That landed heavily, her shoulders lowered slightly. I miscalculated, she said quietly. Yes, she had, and so had David, but miscalculation doesn't erase intent. Did you ever plan to tell me before it was complete? I asked. She hesitated. No, honest, brutal, final. I folded the paper neatly. I'll forward this to my attorney. Her face tightened. You're building a case. I'm protecting my position. She leaned against the counter. And what is your position? Primary ownership. And our marriage? I held her gaze. You stepped outside it strategically. She closed her eyes briefly. I didn't think you'd survive without structure, she whispered. That surprised me, meaning? You built your identity around provider, she said. Without us, I thought you'd collapse. I considered that carefully. Maybe she wasn't entirely wrong. Yesterday, I might have, but yesterday's man was gone. I'm not collapsing, I said calmly. No, she admitted. You're reorganizing. Yes, that was the word. Reorganizing. My phone buzzed again. Richard, LLC discovered. Strong evidence of premeditation. Recommend forensic accountant. I showed Linda the message, her face drained. You found the company? Yes. She sat down slowly. He told me it was standard. For what? For transition. There's that word again. She looked smaller now, not villainous, not dramatic, just smaller. Plans collapsing have weight. I didn't think he'd push it this far, she said. He didn't, I replied. You both did. Silence. Then, quietly, what happens if he's charged? I held her gaze. That depends on what he signed. And what you signed? Fear flickered across her face. Real fear. This wasn't supposed to be criminal, she whispered. It became criminal when consent was manipulated. She covered her mouth with her hand. I felt something then, not triumph, but gravity, because this wasn't just about assets anymore, it was about consequences, and consequences ripple, through family, through reputation, through decades of shared life. At noon, the doorbell rang. Linda stiffened. I stood up slowly and walked to the door. David stood on the porch. No smile, no confidence, just tight composure. Thomas, he said evenly. Leave, I replied. We need to talk. We did. This isn't wise. For you, I said calmly. His jaw tightened. You're going to ruin her, he said quietly. I looked at him carefully. You already tried. He stepped closer. You think the kids will side with you? I'm not asking them to side. You're vindictive. No, I replied. I'm thorough. Silence stretched between us. He studied me, trying to find the old man, the predictable one. He didn't find him. This can still be resolved, he said finally. Yes, I agreed. Through attorneys. He exhaled sharply. You're making an enemy. I held his gaze. You already chose that. Then I closed the door. Linda stood in the hallway, pale. You shouldn't have shut him out like that, she whispered. I didn't shut him out. I said calmly. I closed my door. She looked at me differently now, not as husband, not as predictable, but as someone she genuinely didn't recognize, and maybe that was the real shift, not the filings, not the frozen accounts, not even the discovered LLC, but the fact that I was no longer operating inside the version of me they had planned around, and somewhere deep beneath the anger and the paperwork and the unraveling, I felt something solid forming, not revenge, not bitterness, foundation, and this time. It was mine alone. David didn't leave immediately. I saw his silhouette through the frosted glass beside the door. Still standing there. Waiting. Calculating. For years, I had seen him as steady. Practical. A man who understood risk and reward. Now I saw something else. A man who had mistaken access for entitlement. Linda moved closer to the door. Maybe you should hear him out, she said quietly. I already have, I replied. He thinks you're acting out of hurt. I'm acting out of documentation. She didn't argue. After another minute, I heard David's footsteps retreat down the porch. A car door slammed. The engine started. I didn't look out the window. I didn't need to. I turned back toward Linda. Call Mark and Emily, I said. Her head snapped up. What? We're telling them tonight. No, yes. They don't need to know details. They need to know reality. You'll poison them against me. I won't editorialize. She stared at me. You're not the victim here, she said suddenly. That caught me off guard. No. No, she continued, voice trembling now. You withdrew years ago. You stopped engaging. You made this house feel empty. Empty. I let the word sit between us. Empty doesn't justify theft, I said quietly. It wasn't theft. You signed my name. She flinched. I didn't think you'd object. That's the problem. Silence. Her breathing grew uneven. I didn't think you'd fight, she admitted. There it was again, not regret for the action, regret for the miscalculation. I walked past her into the living room and sat down on the couch. The same couch, the one from the footage. It didn't feel contaminated, it felt clarified. Linda remained standing in the hallway. You're dismantling everything, she whispered. No, I said calmly. I'm exposing it. Her phone buzzed again. She looked at it this time, then back at me. He's asking if I'm safe. Safe, the word almost made me laugh. You are, I said. From me. She typed something quickly and put the phone face down. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said something unexpected. He thinks you'll try to ruin his career. I leaned back slowly. Will I? I asked. She didn't answer. Did he ruin mine? I continued. You're retired. I built a reputation. So did he. I looked at her carefully, and he leveraged it. She sat down across from me now, facing me directly. When did you stop seeing me? She asked. The question wasn't strategic this time, it sounded tired. I never stopped seeing you, I replied. I just assumed you were still there. She swallowed. I felt invisible. And instead of telling me clearly, you built an exit. You wouldn't have listened. You didn't try honestly. I did, she insisted. When? Every time I said I felt alone. I thought back. Had she? Yes, but not like this, not in a way that conveyed desperation, more like passing comments, frustrations. Normal marital fatigue. I didn't know you were building a parallel life, I said quietly. I didn't think of it that way, she whispered. How did you think of it? Insurance. That word again, security, insurance, leverage, everything framed like a transaction. And at what point, I asked softly, did I become the risk? Her eyes filled slightly. When you stopped asking what I wanted, she said. I sat with that, because there was some truth in it. I had assumed consistency was love, assumed providing was enough, assumed stability equaled presence. But assumptions don't authorize deception. I might have failed emotionally, I said. But you failed legally. She didn't argue. That silence told me she understood the distinction. My phone buzzed again. Richard, forensic accountant engaged. Evidence stronger than anticipated. Stronger than anticipated, that meant deeper than I thought. I felt my stomach tighten slightly. What? Linda asked. I hired someone to trace everything. Her shoulders slumped. You're going to tear apart every account we've ever had. Yes. She stared at me as if she was trying to measure the new distance between us. You're colder, she said. I'm clearer. That's not the same. It is when trust is gone. The room felt smaller now, like oxygen had thinned. Do you still love me? She asked suddenly. That question hit harder than the legal filings. I didn't answer immediately, because I didn't know. Love doesn't vanish instantly, but it changes shape when betrayal enters. I don't know what I feel right now, I said honestly. She nodded slowly. That's fair. Another long silence, then she said something that shifted everything slightly. He wasn't the first. I stared at her. What? She looked at the floor. Emotionally, she clarified quickly. Not physically. My chest tightened. When? Years ago, she said. Before retirement. With who? Just conversations, she insisted. Nothing happened. But it could have. She didn't answer, the pattern emerged clearer. This wasn't sudden, it was progressive dissatisfaction, escalating secrecy, compounded by opportunity. How long have you been planning to leave? I asked quietly. She hesitated. A year. A year, 12 months of dinners, holidays, family gatherings, while she built an exit. That's a long time to pretend, I said. It wasn't pretending, she whispered. It was preparing. For life without me. Yes. There it was, unfiltered, final. I stood up slowly. The room felt heavier now, not because of anger, because of certainty. I'm meeting Mark and Emily tonight, I said. You'll tell them everything? I'll tell them facts. You won't embellish? I won't lie. She looked at me for a long moment. You're not trying to save this, she said. You already decided not to. Silence. The weight of that truth settled fully between us. For the first time since this began, I felt something unexpected, grief, not explosive, not dramatic, just quiet mourning for something that had been dissolving long before I saw the footage. 32 years, reduced to filings and forensic audits, but clarity is brutal before it's liberating. Linda stood up slowly. If they hate me, she whispered, I'll never forgive you. I'm not responsible for their reaction, I said, and if they hate you? She asked, then I'll accept it. That surprised her. But it was true, because for the first time in years, I wasn't trying to manage perception, I was managing truth, and truth doesn't negotiate comfort. As the afternoon light shifted across the living room walls, I realized something else. This wasn't just the collapse of a marriage, it was the exposure of a structure that had been hollowed quietly from the inside, and I had finally stopped mistaking quiet for stability. Tonight, the children would know, the filings would continue. The investigation would deepen, and whatever version of my life survived this, it would not be predictable, not anymore. Evening came too quickly, the house felt like it was holding its breath. Linda stayed upstairs most of the afternoon. I could hear faint movements, drawers opening, footsteps pacing, a door closing and reopening. Restlessness. Calculation. Fear. I stayed in the living room, not watching television, not reading, just thinking. At 6:02 p.m., headlights swept across the front windows. Mark's truck. 2 minutes later, another set. Emily's car. I stood before they rang the bell and opened the door. Mark walked in first. His posture was tight, jaw set. Emily followed, eyes scanning my face immediately. What's going on? Mark asked. Sit, I said calmly. They exchanged a look. This wasn't a casual visit. Linda came downstairs slowly, when Emily saw her. Something shifted in her expression, like she already suspected the shape of the truth. We all sat in the living room, the same couch, the same walls that had recorded what they didn't yet know. I didn't dramatize it, didn't pace, didn't raise my voice. I discovered something this week, I began. Through the security system. Mark's eyes flicked toward the hallway camera. Linda stared at the floor. I saw Mom and David together, I continued. In this house. Silence. Emily's breath caught. Mark didn't move. For how long? Mark asked quietly. 6 months physically, I replied. Longer emotionally. Emily's eyes filled instantly. She looked at Linda. Is that true? Linda nodded once. Yes. Mark leaned back slowly, jaw tightening. And that's it? He asked. You're divorcing over an affair? No, I said calmly. There's more. Linda flinched slightly. I continued. There were financial transfers. Property adjustments. An LLC formed without my knowledge. Partial title transfer. Mark's eyes snapped toward me. What? Emily looked confused. What does that mean? She asked. It means, I said evenly, assets were moved. Ownership was altered. Without full consent. Linda's breathing became shallow. It wasn't like that, she said softly. Mark stood up. Then how was it? He snapped. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. It was security, she whispered. Security from who? Mark demanded. From uncertainty. That's not an answer. Emily looked between us. tears slipping down her face, did you plan to leave? She asked Linda. Silence. That silence answered. Mark ran a hand through his hair. You were just going to what? Walk out? It wasn't that simple, Linda said. It sounds simple, he shot back. I remained seated, still, measured. I've initiated legal protection, I said calmly. To freeze further movement. Mark stared at me. You filed? Yes. Against Mom? Against unauthorized transfers. Emily wiped her face. You're both talking like this is a business deal, she whispered. In a way, it had become one. Linda looked at me with something like accusation. You're turning them against me. I'm telling them facts, I replied. Mark's voice dropped. Was David on the title? Yes, I said. His face hardened. You let him put his name on this house? Linda shook her head weakly. It was temporary. Mark laughed bitterly. Temporary ownership? Emily's voice trembled. Why didn't you just talk to Dad? Linda looked at her daughter. I tried. No, I said quietly. You planned. That landed. Mark looked at me carefully. How long did you know? He asked. Since yesterday morning. And you already filed? Yes. He studied me. You're not even yelling. I'm done reacting emotionally, I said. Emily's voice cracked. Are you divorcing? I looked at Linda, then back at them. I don't know yet, I said honestly. Linda's eyes flicked toward me. Surprise. It was the first uncertain answer I'd given. Mark exhaled slowly. David came by earlier, he said. That caught my attention. When? Before we got here. What did he say? That you were unstable. That you misunderstood. I almost smiled. Do I look unstable? I asked. Mark shook his head slowly. No. Emily looked at Linda again. Is Dad lying? No, Linda whispered. The room fell silent, heavy, real. Mark's voice lowered. Did you love him? Linda didn't answer immediately. I felt. Understood, she said. Mark shook his head. You had a family, he said quietly. That sentence hit harder than shouting would have. Emily reached for Linda's hand. Linda let her. I didn't want it to go this far, she whispered. Mark looked at me. What do you want? He asked. Clarity, security, truth. But I chose my words carefully. I want transparency, I said. And protection. From Mom. From anyone who signs my name without consent. Silence again. Mark nodded slowly. That's fair, he said. Linda looked at him in disbelief. You're taking his side. I'm taking the side of facts, Mark replied. Emily looked torn. I don't want you to destroy each other. She whispered. Neither did I, but destruction had already begun months ago. I stood slowly. This isn't about punishment, I said. It's about boundaries. Linda's voice broke slightly. You've never drawn lines like this. I never needed to. Mark looked at me again. You're different, he said. Yes. He nodded once. Good. That surprised me, but I understood what he meant. Not good that this happened, good that I wasn't collapsing. Emily wiped her eyes. What happens now? She asked. Legal process, I said calmly. Forensic review. Asset correction. Linda looked at me, and us? She asked quietly. I held her gaze. That depends on what's left when the truth settles. Silence filled the room one more time, but this silence felt different, less chaotic, more defined. Lines had been drawn, not in anger, in clarity. Mark stood. I'm not cutting either of you off, he said firmly. But I won't pretend this didn't happen. Emily nodded through tears. Me neither. Linda's shoulders shook slightly, not dramatic sobbing, just the weight of consequences arriving fully. As they prepared to leave, Mark paused at the door. Dad, he said quietly. Yes. I didn't think you'd fight. I looked at him. Neither did I. He nodded slowly. Then they were gone. The door closed. The house was quiet again. Linda stood in the middle of the living room. You've changed everything, she whispered. I looked around the room, at the couch, at the camera, at the walls that had recorded the fracture. No, I said quietly. I just stopped pretending it wasn't broken. And for the first time since this began, the silence didn't feel like absence, it felt like foundation shifting, preparing for whatever structure would come next. After the kids left, the house felt larger, not emptier, just wider, like the walls had stepped back to observe what would happen next. Linda didn't move for a long time. She stood in the middle of the living room, arms wrapped around herself, staring at nothing. You didn't have to tell them tonight. She said finally. Yes, I replied. I did. You could have waited. For what? A version that made you look better. She flinched slightly. I'm not your enemy, she said. I looked at her carefully. You made yourself my legal opponent. That's not the same. It is when signatures are involved. She turned away from me and walked toward the kitchen, then stopped halfway, as if unsure where she belonged inside her own house. I never thought it would become this, she said quietly. That's the problem, I replied. You never thought. She spun slightly. That's unfair. No, I said calmly. It's accurate. Silence again, then she said something that caught me off guard. He told me you'd forgive it. Forgive what? I asked. The affair. The transfers. He said you'd be hurt, but you'd fold. Fold, interesting word, why? I asked. Because you hate conflict. I considered that. He wasn't entirely wrong. For decades, I'd chosen stability over confrontation. Peace over pressure. Silence over escalation, but silence can look like surrender. And what did you think? I asked her. She hesitated. I thought. You'd yell. Then calm down. Then negotiate. Negotiate my own removal. Her lips pressed thin. It wasn't removal. It was restructuring. She didn't deny it. I walked into my office and sat down. Linda followed, slower this time. What are you doing now? She asked, reviewing retirement distributions. Her eyes widened slightly. You don't think, I don't assume anymore, I said. She leaned against the doorframe. You're looking at me like I'm a criminal. I'm looking at facts. And if the facts show I didn't intend to hurt you? I looked up. Intent doesn't erase impact. She swallowed. You weren't supposed to feel replaced. But I was. Silence again. The repetition of it felt different now, not avoidance, recognition. My phone buzzed. Richard, forensic accountant, found additional holding account. Linked to LLC. Estimated balance, $142,000. I stared at the number, $142,000. Moved quietly, structured, prepared. I felt a strange calm. Then I showed Linda the message. Her face went completely pale. I didn't know it was that much. She whispered. You signed, I said. He handled the details. You benefited. She shook her head slightly. It wasn't supposed to be this big. How big was it supposed to be? I asked. She had no answer. That silence told me more than words. Did you ever plan to tell me the real amount? I asked quietly. She looked down. No, that was it. No anger, no shouting, just confirmation. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. I need to ask you something, she said after a long moment. Go ahead. If you hadn't seen the camera, how long do you think it would have taken you to notice? The question hung heavy. I thought about it honestly. A month, 6 months, maybe never, not until paperwork arrived. Longer than I'd like to admit, I said. She nodded slowly. That's what I was counting on. The honesty was brutal, and that's why this isn't just betrayal, I said. It's calculation. She covered her face briefly. I didn't think of it as harming you. That's because you framed me as obstacle. She lowered her hands. I framed you as stable. Stable enough to absorb loss. She didn't argue. The house creaked softly again, settling. I don't know who you are right now. She said quietly. I'm the same person, I replied. I'm just not silent. That landed. She stepped further into the office and sat down slowly. What if I say I'll reverse everything? She asked. You can't reverse intent. But I can reverse transfers. Under legal supervision. Her jaw tightened. you don't trust me to fix it. No, the word felt solid, not cruel, just true, and if I choose him? She asked suddenly. I held her gaze. Then choose him. No anger, no plea, her eyes flickered. Surprise, you won't fight for me? I am fighting, I said calmly. Just not the way you expected. She stared at me. For what? For dignity. Silence, that word changed something. Not in the room, in her expression, because dignity isn't dramatic, it's steady. She stood slowly. He said you'd break, she whispered. I almost did, I replied. That was the first vulnerability I'd shown. She paused. When? Yesterday morning. Her breathing softened slightly. But you didn't. No, why? I looked at the camera feed still open on my monitor, because the truth was visible, because illusion had cracked cleanly, because once I saw it clearly, I said, there was nothing left to doubt. She nodded slowly, and doubt was easier, she murmured, yes. We sat in silence again, but this silence felt different, not hostile, not sharp, just heavy with ending. Are you going to divorce me? She asked finally. I didn't answer immediately. Divorce, the word carried weight, finality, division, legal closure. I don't know yet, I said honestly. She studied me carefully. You're not reacting emotionally at all. I reacted already, I said. Now I'm responding. She exhaled slowly. I didn't want to destroy you. I know. That surprised her. You do? Yes. Then why does this feel like war? Because you built a strategy. Silence. Then, very quietly, I didn't think you'd ever see me as the enemy. I don't, I said. She looked confused. I see your actions as threat, I clarified. Not you as enemy. That shifted something. For the first time, her posture softened. And if I choose to stay? She asked. Then you stay without leverage. Her eyes widened slightly. You demand that? Yes. And if I refuse? Then you leave. Clear, simple, unemotional. She looked at me as if weighing something. For the first time, I wasn't the one uncertain, she was, and somewhere in that reversal, I felt something steady anchor inside me, not victory, not revenge, just alignment. The predictable man had been replaced, and the replacement wasn't louder, he was clearer, and clarity is difficult to manipulate. Linda stood and walked toward the hallway. At the doorway, she paused. He's coming undone. She said quietly, David? Yes. He should. She nodded slowly, then she went upstairs. I remained in my office, staring at the numbers on the screen. $142,000, 6 months, an LLC, title transfer, power of attorney. It wasn't random, it was architecture, and for 40 years, I had built structures. I knew when something had been engineered, and this had, which meant there were still load-bearing pieces I hadn't located yet. And until I found them, I wasn't finished. The next morning, the house felt different, not hostile, not tense, just altered, like a building after an earthquake, still standing, but permanently shifted at the foundation. Linda didn't come downstairs right away. I could hear her moving upstairs, slow steps, drawers opening, closing. Not frantic. Just deliberate. I was already in my office when Richard called. I need you to listen carefully, he said. I am. The forensic accountant traced the $142,000. It wasn't just transferred. It was collateralized. Collateralized how? Against a pending property purchase. Out of state. I closed my eyes briefly. They already made an offer. Yes. Conditional approval. Pending final equity clearance. So it wasn't hypothetical, it wasn't a distant idea, it was active. When was closing scheduled? I asked. 3 weeks from now. 3 weeks, 3 weeks from walking into a legally complicated ambush. Anything else? I asked calmly. There was a pause. Yes. That single word tightened something in my chest. They attempted to secure a secondary line of credit using your retirement portfolio as asset verification. Silence filled my office. Attempted? I repeated, it was flagged because of irregular authorization. So they hadn't succeeded, but they had tried, that was new, not just repositioning shared assets, leveraging my retirement, without consent, when? I asked quietly, 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, I had been grilling in the backyard, 2 weeks ago, I had been laughing with Mark, 2 weeks ago, Linda had kissed me goodnight, and somewhere inside that same week, she and David had tried to leverage the last protected piece of my financial identity. I felt something inside me go completely still. Send me everything, I said, it's already on the way. When the call ended, I didn't move for a long time. This wasn't emotional drift, it was escalation, and escalation changes things. Linda appeared in the doorway, she must have sensed the shift. What? She asked quietly. They tried to leverage my retirement, I said, her face drained of color. What? Secondary line of credit. Using my portfolio. She shook her head immediately. No. That wasn't, it was submitted, I interrupted calmly, I didn't authorize that. But you authorized the LLC. Her breathing grew shallow. He told me it was just for equity matching, she whispered, and you believed him. Yes. I studied her carefully. This time, her fear looked different, not fear of exposure, fear of losing control of the narrative. You didn't think he'd go that far, I said. No, but you were comfortable going far enough. She closed her eyes briefly. I thought we had limits, she said. I almost laughed. You built this. I didn't build that, she insisted, voice breaking slightly. Not the retirement. But you started the architecture. That landed. She stepped into the room slowly. I never wanted to ruin you, she whispered. You risked everything I built. I thought you'd recover. That sentence hit harder than the rest. You thought I was replaceable, I said quietly. No, yes. Silence. She didn't deny it this time, because somewhere deep down, she had assumed I would absorb the loss, that I was stable enough to survive restructuring, that I would fold. I'm calling him, she said suddenly. Put it on speaker. She hesitated, then nodded. The phone rang twice before David answered. Linda. It's on speaker, she said immediately. Silence, then a shift in his tone. Thomas. You attempted to leverage my retirement portfolio, I said calmly. That's exaggerated, he replied. It's documented. That was exploratory. You submitted formal documentation. It didn't execute. Because it was flagged. Silence. Why? I asked. There was a pause. For liquidity flexibility. For your purchase. For transition. There's that word again, I said. Linda's breathing grew uneven beside me. You were going to secure the house, move assets, and leverage retirement, I continued. Without disclosure. You were going to be compensated, he snapped. Compensated, as if I were being bought out of my own life. With what? I asked calmly. My own equity. His composure cracked slightly. You're overcomplicating this. No, I replied. You underestimated resistance. Silence. Linda spoke next. Her voice trembling. You told me there were limits. There are, David said quickly. This crossed them, she whispered. Another pause. This only became a problem because he checked, David said. That sentence hung in the air like a confession. Only a problem because I looked, not because it was wrong, but because it was seen. I felt something inside me harden. 48 hours, I said. Full accounting. Or this expands. You're threatening me, he said. No, I replied evenly. I'm informing you. Silence, then the call ended. Linda lowered the phone slowly. He's panicking, she whispered. He should have panicked earlier. She looked at me differently now. Not just uncertain, disillusioned. You don't see him the same anymore, she said quietly. No, and you don't see me the same. No, silence filled the room again, but this silence felt irreversible. Did you ever love me? She asked suddenly. The question was softer this time, less defensive, more fragile. Yes, I said, past tense. Yes. Her eyes filled finally, tears this time, real ones, not manipulative, not strategic, just grief. I thought you stopped loving me years ago, she whispered. I stopped expressing it loudly, I said. That's different. You stopped fighting for me. I thought peace was enough. She shook her head slowly. It wasn't. We stood there, facing each other across the wreckage of assumptions. Did you love him? I asked quietly. She hesitated. I loved how I felt around him, she admitted. That was honest, and painful. I nodded slowly. Then you built around that feeling. Yes. And you built it on my foundation. Silence. She didn't argue, because it was true. I stepped back toward my desk. There's no more room for partial truths, I said calmly. Everything surfaces now. She wiped her face. And if he goes down? She asked. That depends on what he signed. And me? That depends on what you admit. Her breathing trembled slightly. I never thought you'd choose this path. I never thought I'd need to. Silence again, but this time, something else lingered beneath it. Finality. Not because papers were filed, not because accounts were frozen, but because the illusion of partnership was gone, and once illusion dies, it doesn't resurrect easily. Linda stepped backward toward the hallway. If I walk away now, she said quietly, there's no coming back. I held her gaze. If you stay without leverage, I replied, there might be. She stared at me for a long moment, weighing, calculating, feeling. For the first time since this began, she was the one standing at a crossroads, and I wasn't chasing her, I wasn't pleading, I wasn't negotiating from fear. I was simply standing, steady, clear, and no longer predictable, and that shift was something neither of them had prepared for. Linda didn't answer immediately. She stood there in the doorway, tears still on her face, but her expression wasn't purely grief anymore, it was calculation colliding with consequence. If I cut him off, she said slowly, completely. Will you stop? Stop what? I asked calmly. The legal escalation. I studied her carefully. Is that why you'd cut him off? She didn't respond. That silence told me everything. Then no, I said. Her jaw tightened. You want him ruined. I want exposure. That's the same thing. No, I replied evenly. Ruining is emotional. Exposure is factual. She looked at me like she was trying to decide whether I'd become heartless or just impossible to move. You're not angry anymore, she said quietly. I was, I answered. Now I'm done being surprised. Silence stretched between us, then she asked the question she'd been circling for hours. Are you divorcing me? I didn't answer right away, because now it wasn't about reaction, it was about structure. If this was only the affair, I said slowly, we'd be in a different conversation. She flinched, but this wasn't only that. She lowered her gaze. I know. You formed an LLC. Yes. You transferred 6 figures. Yes. You authorized power over my assets. Yes. You allowed him to attempt leverage against my retirement. I didn't know. You allowed him access. I corrected calmly. Silence. Her shoulders sank slightly. Yes. That word echoed. No defensiveness, no reframe, just yes. I stood up and walked past her into the hallway. She turned, watching me. I stopped beneath the camera again, looked up at it. Strange how something so small could dismantle something so large. If that camera hadn't been there, I said quietly, where would we be in 3 weeks? She didn't answer. Closing on a house. I continued. Me signing something under the guise of restructuring? Her voice barely carried, yes. There it was, the final confirmation, not suspicion, not interpretation, planned. You were going to leave, I said. Yes. And you were going to make sure I didn't see it coming. Silence, then, yes. I felt something settle completely inside me, not rage, not heartbreak, just certainty. 32 years, and in the final stage, I was being managed. That was the fracture, not the kiss, not the money, the management. You don't come back from that easily, I said quietly. Her breathing trembled. I thought I was protecting myself. You were protecting your exit. She covered her mouth again, but there was no defense left, just reality. what if I stay? She asked again, without leverage. I said, yes. Without hidden structures. Yes. Without him. She hesitated. That hesitation was louder than any confession. You're still weighing him, I said. I'm weighing my life, she replied softly, and I'm weighing mine. Silence, heavy, then she said something unexpected. He thinks you'll push this until I'm implicated. I will push until the truth is documented, I said calmly, and if that hurts me? You hurt me. That wasn't retaliation, it was symmetry. She looked at me as if the balance had finally become visible. This isn't about saving us anymore, she whispered. No, I agreed. It's about not losing myself. That landed, because she understood that language, security, foundation, identity. For years, she had feared losing herself. Now I was guarding mine. Her phone buzzed again. She didn't pick it up. I can't breathe inside this house right now, she said. You can leave. And come back. That depends on what you decide. She stared at me. You're not chasing me. No, you're not asking me to stay. No, and that doesn't hurt you. I paused. It did, but not in the way she expected. It hurts, I said quietly. But not enough to abandon clarity. Her eyes filled again. You really are different. I'm the same man, I replied. I just stopped assuming loyalty. Silence again, then she nodded once. I need time. Take it. And you? I'm staying. She looked around the house. At the staircase, at the hallway, at the living room where her secret had unfolded under a silent lens. This doesn't feel like home anymore, she whispered. It wasn't, I said, that was the truth. It had been staging, preparation, transition, now it was exposed. She walked toward the bedroom slowly. Halfway down the hall, she stopped. If I cut him off, she said without turning, it won't be because you forced me. Good, I replied, it'll be because I see what he actually was. I didn't respond, because that realization, if genuine, had to be hers alone. She disappeared into the bedroom. A few minutes later, I heard a suitcase unzip, not frantic, not chaotic. Measured, deliberate, she wasn't running, she was stepping back. I remained in the hallway, listening, feeling. For the first time since this began, the house felt honest, broken, but honest. My phone buzzed again. Richard, forensic accountant, found email chain. Pre-transfer coordination. Forwarding now. Email chain, pre-transfer, coordination. I opened it. Subject lines, Phase 2. Liquidity window. Title adjustment timeline. Linda copied on several, her replies short, approving, agreeing, confirming. This wasn't confusion, it was participation. I stared at the screen for a long time. The final doubt dissolved. Upstairs, the suitcase zipped closed. Footsteps approached. Linda came down the stairs slowly, a small bag in her hand. Not everything, just essentials. She stopped at the bottom. I'm going to stay with Emily for a few days, she said quietly. Okay. She searched my face one last time, for anything. There was no plea, no dramatic goodbye, just a crossroads. Are you already gone? She asked softly. I considered that carefully. Emotionally, not entirely. Legally, in motion. Structurally, yes. I'm no longer standing where you left me, I said. That was the most honest answer I could give. She nodded slowly. Then she walked to the door, paused, looked back once, then stepped outside. The door closed. The house went silent, not tense, not fragile, just still. I stood alone in the living room, the camera above the hallway blinking quietly. Witness, not judge, not savior, just witness. If I hadn't checked it, my life would already be dismantled in ways I wouldn't yet understand. Instead, I was standing, alone, but aware, and somewhere beneath the grief, beneath the exhaustion, beneath the filings and the exposure, there was something else, strength, not loud, not dramatic, but unshakable, and this time, it belonged entirely to me. The house was quiet in a way it hadn't been in years, not because it was empty, because it was no longer pretending. Linda's absence didn't feel like shock. It felt like confirmation. The performance had ended. The stage lights were off. What remained was structure, and I understood structure. I walked slowly through each room that night, the bedroom, the kitchen, the dining table where I had signed papers I hadn't read carefully enough. I didn't feel rage anymore, I felt inventory. When you build things for a living, you learn something early. When a foundation cracks, you don't scream at it. You assess load-bearing points. You check what can be salvaged. You decide what must be demolished. Around 9:30 p.m., my phone buzzed. Emily, Mom's here. I stared at the message for a moment. Then she sent another, she's not okay. I typed back, I know. A pause, then, are you? That question lingered longer. Was I? I looked around the living room. The silence wasn't suffocating. It was steady. Yes, I replied. A few seconds passed. She says you've changed. I considered that. Maybe I stopped ignoring things. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Are you going to press charges? She asked. That was the question beneath everything. Legal correction is one thing, criminal implication is another. I'm going to let the process reveal what it reveals, I answered. She didn't reply right away. Then, don't destroy each other. I stared at the screen. We already did, but I didn't send that. I'm not trying to destroy anyone, I wrote. I'm protecting myself. That was the truth. Upstairs, the bedroom felt different without her, not emptier, just honest, the closet door half open. A row of dresses missing. Space where her shoes had been. I didn't close the gaps, I left them visible, because pretending they weren't there would be another form of denial. At 10:14 p.m., another message came, not from Emily, not from Linda, from an unknown number again. You've pushed her into panic. David, I didn't block this one, not yet. I stared at the message for a moment before replying. She made choices. The response came quickly. You're escalating beyond reason. Beyond your plan, I typed. Pause, you're not thinking clearly. That one almost made me smile. I've never thought more clearly. Several seconds passed. Then, if you proceed criminally, it implicates her. That was the second time he'd framed it that way. Not if I'm exposed. If she is. I leaned back against the headboard and stared at the ceiling. Then perhaps you shouldn't have structured it that way, I replied. No response. I set the phone down. For the first time since this began, I allowed myself to feel something fully, not anger, not humiliation, loss. 32 years isn't erased by documentation. There were good years. Real laughter, real partnership, but somewhere along the way, partnership became parallel planning, and that's the fracture that matters. Around midnight, I went back to my office, opened the email Richard had forwarded earlier, the Phase 2 chain. This time I read every word, timelines, asset conversion projections, projected equity after liquidation. A line from David stood out. Thomas will accept restructuring if framed as tax optimization. Framed, I stared at that word for a long time. They had built the narrative in advance, anticipated my reaction, modeled my resistance level. That wasn't just betrayal, it was profiling, and that's when something else became clear. This hadn't started with romance, it started with analysis. David didn't just seduce my wife, he studied me, my habits, my avoidance of conflict, my trust, and he built around it. The affair came later, the structure came first. That realization shifted something fundamental. This wasn't a love triangle, it was strategic exploitation, and that meant something important. Linda hadn't just fallen for him. She had trusted his architecture, and now that architecture was collapsing. My phone buzzed again. Linda this time. I didn't know about the retirement attempt. I read it twice, then replied, you knew about the structure. Pause, I thought he had limits. Limits move when unchecked. No immediate response. Then, did you ever think I'd do this? I stared at that question. Honestly, no, but that's because I thought betrayal came from impulse, not spreadsheets. I thought we were flawed, I wrote back. Not strategic. 3 dots. Then, I was afraid of becoming invisible. That one hurt, because I understood that fear. I just hadn't known it was that severe. You made me invisible, I replied. No response. A few minutes passed. Then, I don't know what I'm supposed to feel right now. I leaned back in my chair, neither did I. Start with responsibility, I typed, long pause, then, I'm scared. I believe that. But fear now wasn't about losing me, it was about consequences. You should be, I wrote, not cruel, just honest. The house creaked again, settling, or maybe that was me, settling into the reality that this wasn't about whether she'd come back, it was about whether she had already left long ago. At 1:07 a.m., another email came from Richard, forensic accountant identified additional anomaly. Meeting tomorrow 9 a.m., additional anomaly. I stared at the words. Of course there was more, there's always more when structure is deliberate. I closed the laptop and stood up, walked back into the hallway, looked up at the camera again, it blinked steadily, silent, patient. If not for that lens, I would still be asleep inside a staged bed, predictable, managed, handled. Instead, I was awake, alone, yes, but awake, and as I stood there in the quiet house, I realized something unexpected. I wasn't afraid of losing her, I was afraid of losing myself, and that fear, that was worth fighting for. Tomorrow, I would learn what the next anomaly was. Tomorrow, the architecture would reveal another layer, and whatever it exposed, I would not look away. I was awake before the alarm, not restless, not anxious, just alert. There's a difference. When illusion collapses, your senses sharpen. You stop drifting through routine and start observing it. At 8:45 a.m., I was already in Richard's office. He didn't waste time with small talk. There's another layer, he said. I nodded once, I assumed there would be. He slid a printed document across the desk, life insurance beneficiary modification. Filed 4 months ago. I looked down, policy number matched mine, primary beneficiary, removed, replaced with, Linda Mercer, 100%, that wasn't unusual, she had always been primary beneficiary. Then I looked closer, contingent beneficiary, Collins Holdings LLC, my stomach went completely still. Explain, I said quietly. Richard's voice was measured. If you had passed during the policy period, payout would route through her. But if payout were contested or delayed, the LLC would serve as trustee intermediary. In practical terms, I said, what does that mean? It means Collins Holdings would temporarily control the funds. Control, there it was again, control, not ownership outright, but access, authority, leverage. When was this signed? I asked, digitally. Via DocuSign authentication. Timestamp 11:52 p.m., I didn't need to ask which night, same window, same pattern, stacked documents, layered permissions. You're certain I authenticated it? I asked. Richard gave me a look. IP address matches your home network. Of course it did, stacked paperwork, trust, signature fatigue. I leaned back slowly. This wasn't accidental, this wasn't opportunistic, this was systematic. She modified beneficiary routing, I said quietly, yes. And added his company as contingency. Yes. Richard folded his hands. This is premeditated asset structuring. There it was, the word that had been hovering, premeditated. I nodded once. Proceed, I said. You want to contest it? I want every unauthorized instrument challenged. He studied me. This won't stay private much longer. I know. When I stepped back into the morning air, something had shifted again, not shock, not disbelief, finality, because there's a difference between emotional betrayal and calculated positioning around mortality. She hadn't just built an exit in life, she had structured contingency in death, and that changes the story. I got back into my car but didn't start it right away. I sat there, hands on the wheel, staring forward. 32 years, birthdays, vacations, shared losses, shared victories, and somewhere in the last year, she had opened documents at midnight and repositioned my life as leverage, not because she wanted me gone, but because she wanted security no matter what, and I had been the risk variable. My phone buzzed. Linda, I heard from David. He says you found more. Yes. Pause, what is it? Insurance routing. Silence, then, very quietly, oh. Not confusion. Recognition. You didn't tell me that part, I said. I thought it was procedural. Procedural to insert his company into my policy. He said it was protection. For who? For me. There it was again, everything framed as protection. I was protecting you for 32 years, I said calmly. You were protecting stability, she replied, and you were protecting exit. Silence, her breathing faint through the phone. I didn't think you'd ever look at those, she whispered. That's the problem, I replied. Long pause. Are you going to make this criminal? She asked. I'm going to let the evidence define it. You know what that means? Yes. And you're okay with that? I thought about that carefully. Was I okay with the possibility that she could face legal consequences? No. Was I okay with pretending it hadn't happened? Also no. I'm okay with truth, I said. She exhaled shakily. I didn't think you'd choose principle over us. You chose contingency over us. That landed. Silence. Then something unexpected. I never thought you'd survive without me, she whispered. I closed my eyes briefly. And I never thought you'd prepare for my death like a transaction. That was the first time the weight of it fully landed in her voice. That's not what it was, she said quickly. It was structured. It was fear. Fear doesn't require LLC trustees. She didn't answer, because she couldn't. I drove home slowly. The house looked the same, but it no longer felt like shared territory. It felt like a site under review. When I stepped inside, the quiet wasn't lonely. It was clarifying. I walked straight to the hallway camera and looked up again. That small lens had cracked a system months in the making. If not for that notification, the insurance adjustment would have remained buried. The retirement leverage unnoticed, the closing finalized, the exit executed, and I would have woken up in a life already divided. Instead, I was ahead of it, not by luck, by accident, and that irony wasn't lost on me. My phone buzzed again. Mark, Mom told me about the insurance. Of course she had. I found it, I replied. Pause. That's extreme, he wrote. Yes. Another pause. Are you safe? The question surprised me. Yes. Physically? Yes. Longer pause. Dad. You don't think she'd? No, I interrupted via text. This isn't about harm. It wasn't. It was about control. But I understood his question. When death contingencies enter documentation, imagination follows. She says she was scared, Mark wrote. I believe her. Then why push this? Because fear structured into paperwork doesn't disappear with apology. Because fear turned into action, I replied. 3 dots. Then, I don't know how to stand in this. Neither did I. You don't have to pick sides, I wrote. Just see clearly. No response. I put the phone down and walked into the living room, sat on the couch again, the same couch, the site of discovery. I leaned back and let the silence settle. What surprised me most wasn't the anger, it was the calm, because once you understand the architecture of betrayal, it stops feeling chaotic, it becomes structural, and structures can be dismantled, rebuilt, or condemned. Linda called again around noon. I cut him off, she said immediately. I didn't respond right away, completely, she added. Why? I asked. Because I see it now. See what? That he wasn't just loving me. No, he was modeling outcome, he was modeling exit. I said, yes. Silence. And you? She asked. I'm modeling protection. Another pause. Is there any version of this where we don't end? She whispered. I thought about that carefully. Love can survive betrayal, sometimes, but calculated displacement, that's harder, maybe, I said honestly. But not this version. She swallowed audibly. What would that version require? Total transparency. Yes. Legal reversal. Yes. Therapy. Pause. Yes. And no leverage. Ever again. Long silence, then, very quietly, I don't know who I am without leverage. That was the most honest thing she'd said since this began. And in that confession, I finally understood the core. This wasn't about replacing me, it was about never feeling dependent again, and she had mistaken partnership for dependency. You'll have to find out, I said. Silence stretched between us. then she whispered, "So will you." The line went quiet, and as I sat alone in the living room, documents in motion, assets under review, marriage suspended between collapse and reconstruction, I realized something undeniable. This wasn't just about catching them on camera, it was about catching the moment I stopped being managed, and once you see that clearly, you can't unsee it. The meeting with the forensic accountant was quieter than I expected. I had imagined something dramatic, a revelation, a final number that would shock me. Instead, it was spreadsheets. Columns. Timestamps. Clean lines that told a dirty story. Her name was Melissa Grant. Early 40s. Precise voice. No wasted words, she projected the transaction flow onto a screen in Richard's conference room. "This is the primary account," she said, highlighting the familiar joint checking. From here, funds were moved in staggered intervals to an intermediary holding account. "That's the LLC?" I asked. "Yes. Collins Holdings." The name no longer felt abstract. It felt invasive. Melissa zoomed in. The transfers were structured intentionally below standard review thresholds for the first 3 months. Then they increased in size once internal consistency was established. Internal consistency, they were testing the system, I said. She nodded once, yes. Richard leaned back slightly. Was Thomas's authorization required for these? For the larger amounts, yes. Which is why they were paired with refinance documentation dates. Paired, layered, stacked, like insulation between beams, hidden but load-bearing. Melissa clicked again. "This is the critical pivot point." A date appeared on screen. 4 months ago. What happened there? I asked. The LLC acquired conditional interest in a property out of state. A 40% equity stake contingent upon closing. That's when the insurance modification happened. I said, "Yes," she replied. Richard looked at me carefully. This wasn't emotional escalation. It was timeline alignment. I nodded slowly. They weren't improvising, they were sequencing. Melissa changed slides. This is where it becomes more concerning. Another set of documents appeared. David submitted a pre-approval request for a business expansion loan under the LLC, she continued. He listed projected incoming capital, specifically referencing anticipated liquidity event. Liquidity event, that's me, I said quietly. She didn't soften it. Yes. Richard spoke evenly. You were categorized as pending capital. Not partner, not husband, capital. I stared at the screen for a long moment. 32 years reduced to a projected liquidity event. When would that liquidity event occur? I asked. Melissa clicked again. Projected within 12 months. 12 months, that was their runway, meaning, Richard said calmly, if divorce was finalized or a settlement executed, funds would transfer, closing would proceed, and the LLC would stabilize. And if I died, I added. Silence. Melissa didn't look away. Insurance payout would accelerate the liquidity event. The room felt colder, not because I thought they planned my death, but because they had modeled it. Contingency planning, mortality monetized. I leaned back slowly. They built multiple exit paths. I said, yes, Melissa replied. Richard folded his hands. This is no longer just marital misconduct. This is structured financial exploitation. There it was, the word I had been circling, exploitation. I felt anger then, not explosive, focused. They hadn't just planned a future without me, they had positioned me as resource. I stood slowly. What's the exposure? I asked. Richard answered, if we pursue criminal review, there is strong evidence of misrepresentation and fraudulent inducement. And Linda? He hesitated. She signed documentation. Knowingly. Melissa looked at me carefully. The email chain suggests awareness of structure. Whether she understood full legal implications is arguable. That word mattered, arguable, meaning she could claim partial ignorance, meaning she might not fully grasp the architecture she participated in, but participation was still participation. I nodded once. Proceed with civil protection first, I said. Hold criminal in reserve. Richard studied me. You're thinking strategically. Yes. You're not reacting emotionally. No, he nodded slightly, that may save you. Maybe, or maybe it was too late for saving anything. When I returned home, the house felt even more detached, like it no longer belonged to a marriage, it belonged to documentation. My phone buzzed. Linda, how bad is it? Straight to the point. They modeled multiple exit paths, I replied. Pause, what does that mean? It means I was a liquidity event. Silence, long. Then, I didn't know he phrased it like that. But you knew the structure. Yes. And you didn't question the language? I trusted him. There it was again, trust displaced. You trusted him with architecture, I said. Yes. And you trusted I wouldn't check. Silence. Then, quietly, yes. The honesty hurt less now, because it confirmed the pattern. I need you to tell me something, she said. What? Do you think I was using you? I thought about that carefully, not emotionally, structurally. Yes, I said. Her breath caught. That wasn't my intention. It was the outcome. Long silence. I thought I was securing myself. At my expense. I didn't see it that way. That's because you weren't the variable. She didn't answer, because she understood. For months, she had felt powerless, so she built leverage, and I became the structure she leveraged against. My phone buzzed again. Mark, Mom says this is about fear. I stared at the message. Fear can explain behavior, it doesn't erase consequence. Fear doesn't excuse architecture, I replied. Pause, she says you stopped seeing her. Maybe I had, but I hadn't stopped honoring her. She stopped seeing me first. I typed. No response. I walked into the living room again and sat down. The camera blinked softly above the hallway. Witness, if not for that lens, I would be weeks from collapse. Instead, I was standing at the edge of reconstruction. Linda called again that evening. I cut off access to the LLC, she said. Good. I requested withdrawal from the holding account. Under supervision? Yes. Did he agree? No, of course not. He says you're destroying his life, she whispered. He built his life on projected extraction. Silence. Are you going to press charges? She asked again. I haven't decided. What are you waiting for? I looked around the quiet house. For clarity, I said. You already have it. Not emotionally. Silence. Then she said something different. He told me if I walk away from him, he'll cooperate against me. There it was, the fracture between them, meaning? I asked. He'll claim I understood everything. Did she? That was the question, did you? I asked quietly. Silence. I understood we were planning to leave, she said. I didn't understand he'd escalated to that level. That might be true, he was strategist, she was participant, different roles, same structure. If he turns, I said, it won't be because of me. It'll be because he's protecting himself. And me? You chose proximity to that structure. Her breathing grew uneven again. I didn't think you'd become this cold. I'm not cold, I replied. I'm stable. Stability, the word felt different now, not passivity, not predictability, foundation. You don't need me anymore, she said quietly. That sentence lingered. Maybe I never did, maybe I just believed I did. I need partnership, I said. Not contingency. Silence. And if I can't be that? She asked. Then we're finished. There it was, not shouted, not dramatic, just defined. She didn't argue, she didn't cry, she just breathed. I never thought you'd draw the line, she whispered. I never thought I'd have to. The call ended softly, and as I sat alone in the dim living room, I realized something undeniable. This wasn't about whether she loved me, it was about whether she respected the structure, and once respect fractures, love alone doesn't hold weight. The architecture had been exposed, the leverage identified, the contingency revealed. Now only one question remained: would she choose partnership or continue protecting herself? And this time, I wasn't waiting in the dark to find out. 2 days passed without drama, and that silence was more unsettling than confrontation. No more late-night messages from David. No more unknown numbers. No frantic calls. Just quiet. Quiet means recalibration. On the third morning, Richard called again. David retained counsel, he said. I assumed he would. He's offering negotiation. On what terms? Mutual asset unwinding. No admission of wrongdoing. No criminal escalation. Of course, stabilize the damage. Contain exposure. Preserve reputation, and Linda? I asked. He's positioning her as misinformed. Interesting, he's separating himself from her. Yes. That didn't surprise me. Strategists shed liability quickly, and her exposure? I asked. Reduced if she cooperates. Increased if she aligns with him. There it was, her crossroads, not emotional, legal. I thanked Richard and ended the call. The house still felt hollow, not abandoned, but transitional. Linda hadn't come back yet. She was still at Emily's. Around noon, my phone buzzed. It was Linda. He hired a lawyer, she said immediately. I know. Silence. You talked to Richard? Yes. He's saying this can be cleaned up quietly. For who? For everyone. No, I replied. For him. She exhaled slowly. He's saying if this goes criminal, he'll have to defend himself fully. Meaning? He'll say I was fully aware. Were you? Silence. Then, I knew enough. That mattered. Enough. Did you know about the retirement attempt? I asked. No. Did you know about the insurance contingency? Yes. That answer settled heavily. So she had known, maybe not every detail. But enough. Why? I asked quietly. Because I didn't want to be dependent, she said. Dependent. That word again. You were married, I said. I felt trapped, she replied. In what? In predictability. I almost laughed at the irony. You built an exit through manipulation, I said. I built an exit through security. At my expense. Silence. He says if I testify that I understood everything, she continued, it protects him. And implicates you. Yes. And if you don't? He'll say I orchestrated it. There it was, the fracture, the strategist and the participant diverging. He's protecting himself, I said. Yes. And you're surprised? No. Long pause. I thought he loved me, she whispered. Love, that word felt smaller now. He loved the structure, I replied. Silence. I don't know what to do, she said. That was the first time she'd admitted uncertainty without defense. You decide who you are in this, I said. What does that mean? Were you manipulated? Or were you complicit? Silence. Longer this time. I don't know where the line is, she whispered. You crossed it, I said. Not cruel, just factual. She didn't argue, because she knew. He says you're trying to ruin us both, she said. I'm trying to stop being managed. Silence. Then, quietly, I see that now. That felt different, not reactive. Not strategic, recognition. I stood and walked to the hallway camera again, looked up at it. Strange how something so ordinary could unravel something so deliberate. If that camera hadn't recorded that night, I said slowly, you'd be weeks from leaving. Yes. And I'd be signing final paperwork soon. Yes. And the house would close. Yes. And I would believe it was mutual. Silence. Yes, she whispered. There it was, the full admission, not accidental drift, not emotional chaos, engineered exit. Do you regret it? I asked. Yes. For what reason? Another long pause. Because I see how far it went, she said. And I see how little I questioned. That answer mattered, not regret for being caught, regret for depth. But was it enough? That's not remorse, I said quietly. That's realization. What's the difference? Remorse would have stopped it before exposure. Silence. She didn't defend herself. That was new. What are you going to do? She asked. I'm waiting. For what? To see who you align with. Silence. Then, if I cooperate fully? I proceed civilly. And if I don't? I proceed fully. She inhaled sharply. You'd really let it become criminal? I didn't make it criminal. That hung between us, because it was true. You don't hate me, she said suddenly. No, you don't love me the same. No, silence. Then she said something that shifted everything slightly. He told me something yesterday. What? He said you were always too passive to fight. I almost smiled. He miscalculated. Yes. Her voice softened. So did I. That was the first time she included herself in that sentence. And that mattered. I'm meeting him tomorrow, she said. My body went still. Why? To tell him I'm not backing him. Silence. That's dangerous, I said. He won't hurt me. I'm not worried about that. Then what? I'm worried about what he'll say. She understood. He'll protect himself. Yes. And maybe expose you. Yes. Silence. You'd still proceed? She asked. If the facts require it. Long pause. I never thought you'd choose integrity over comfort, she whispered. I never thought you'd choose leverage over partnership. That landed. She didn't respond. After a moment, she said, if I testify that he structured most of it. Would you still divorce me? That question was honest, not defensive, honest. I don't know, I said, and that was the truth, because divorce wasn't about punishment, it was about foundation, and I didn't yet know if there was one left. She exhaled slowly. I'm tired of feeling like I need protection, she said. Then stop building contingency, I replied. Silence. Then, softly, will you wait until tomorrow before making anything criminal? I considered that carefully, strategically, emotionally. Yes, I said. She exhaled in relief. Thank you. The line went quiet, and as I stood alone again in the living room, something became clear. This wasn't just a battle of documents anymore, it was a battle of identity. Was she the woman who built leverage behind my back, or the woman who finally saw the structure for what it was? Tomorrow would reveal that, and for the first time since this began, the outcome wasn't entirely in my hands. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was anxious, because I was aware. There's a difference. When you're no longer being managed, your mind doesn't drift, it calculates. Linda was meeting David at 10 in the morning, neutral place, she said, public, safe. I didn't try to stop her. If she was going to choose, she had to choose without my shadow over her shoulder. At 9:58 a.m., my phone buzzed. I'm here. Short message, no emotion. At 10:17 a.m., another. He's calm. Of course he was. Strategists remain calm until leverage shifts. At 10:41 a.m., my phone rang. Linda. I answered immediately. He's offering to shift everything onto himself, she said. Voice low but steady, in exchange for me saying I didn't understand the scope. And did you? Silence. Yes, she whispered. There it was, the line. He was offering her protection through partial dishonesty. She would become naive participant. He would become architect, contain damage, control narrative, and... I asked. He says if I don't agree, he'll release the email chain that makes it look like I drove the timeline. I didn't react. He's protecting himself, I said. Yes. And you're surprised? No, there was noise in the background. A cafe maybe. Clinking cups. I need to know something, she said. What? If I refuse him? And this goes fully legal. Will you still protect me? That question held everything: trust, responsibility, accountability. I will not lie, I said carefully. But I will not exaggerate. Silence. That's not protection, she whispered, it's integrity. She breathed slowly. He says you're weaponizing morality. No, I replied. I'm removing negotiation. Long pause, then, I'm tired. Of course she was. Living inside dual narratives exhausts you. I see him clearly now, she said quietly. How? He's not fighting for us. He's fighting for his name. That mattered, not because it redeemed her, but because she was finally seeing the structure. And what are you fighting for? I asked. Silence. Then, I don't know anymore. That honesty felt raw. Then choose truth, I said. There was movement on the other end, chairs scraping. I told him no, she said. My pulse slowed slightly. No to what? To shifting blame. To minimizing my role. To framing you as unstable. Silence. What did he say? I asked. He said I'd regret it. And? He said if he falls, I fall. There it was, the fracture, the alliance dissolving. He underestimated you, I said quietly. Yes. And you underestimated me. Yes. We stayed silent for a moment, not tense, not frantic, just two people standing in the aftermath of architecture collapsing. I'm coming home. She said finally. That sentence landed differently than before, not as assumption, as request. For what purpose? I asked. To stop running. Silence. That doesn't erase what happened, I said. I know. It doesn't reverse documents. I know. It doesn't rebuild trust. I know. Another pause, but it's a start, she whispered. I didn't answer immediately, because this wasn't about sentiment, it was about foundation. Come home, I said, not invitation, permission. When she walked through the front door 40 minutes later, she looked different, not defeated, not dramatic, just stripped of performance. No suitcase this time, no defensiveness. She stood in the hallway beneath the camera and looked up at it. That thing changed everything, she said quietly. No, I replied. It revealed it. She nodded slowly. I told him I won't cooperate against you, she said, and? He said you'll destroy us both. Maybe he's right. She studied my face. You don't look like someone who wants destruction. I want alignment. She stepped further into the house. I told him I knew more than I admitted. She continued. That caught my attention. Explain. I told him I approved the timeline. That I signed willingly. That I understood we were building exit. Silence. That helps him, I said. Yes. And hurts you. Yes. Why? She met my eyes directly. Because I'm done pretending I was naive. That mattered, deeply, not legally, structurally. For the first time, she wasn't minimizing her role, she wasn't shifting blame, she was owning architecture, and that changes posture. What did he say? I asked. He said I'm stupid. I almost smiled. No, I said calmly. You're just no longer useful. Silence. She exhaled slowly. I thought leverage meant safety, she said. It means control, I replied, and control isn't love. No, she nodded faintly. I see that now. The house felt different with her standing there again, not restored, not reconciled, but honest. What happens now? She asked. We proceed civilly, I said. We unwind what can be unwound. And us? I looked at her carefully. For the first time, I said, we're standing without strategy. She swallowed, and I don't know what that reveals yet. Silence, but not the heavy kind, the evaluative kind. I was afraid of becoming invisible, she said softly. You made me invisible in my own life. Yes. The directness of that admission shifted something, not forgiveness, but wait. She stepped closer. I don't want leverage anymore, she said. Then you'll have to tolerate vulnerability. I don't know how. Learn. Silence. Then she asked the question that had been hovering since the beginning. Do you still love me? I didn't answer quickly. Because love now wasn't about feeling, it was about foundation. I don't know yet, I said honestly. She nodded slowly. That's fair. We stood there for a long moment beneath the quiet blinking camera, two people stripped of narrative, no strategist, no predictable man, just truth, and truth is uncomfortable before it's stable. My phone buzzed. Richard, he requested mediation. Immediate. Of course he did, pressure rising, exposure increasing. I looked at Linda. He wants mediation, I said. Of course he does. He's trying to contain. Yes. And you? I'm done containing, she said. That was new. I studied her face, not searching for deception, searching for structure. Maybe this was the first honest step, maybe it was too late, but for the first time since I caught them on camera, the architecture wasn't hidden, it was exposed, and exposed structures can either collapse or be rebuilt properly. The question now wasn't whether she loved me, or whether I loved her, the question was simpler: could we stand without leverage? And this time, there were no cameras needed to see the answer forming. It wasn't victory, it was closure of one chapter. The documents were signed over the next week, funds returned, LLC dissolved, insurance routing corrected, title restored. On paper, the architecture collapsed cleanly, but paper doesn't rebuild trust. Linda moved back into the house quietly, not as if nothing had happened, not as if we were resuming. She moved back like someone stepping into a space that might not be hers anymore. We didn't share the bedroom, not yet, we didn't pretend, we coexisted in honesty. That was new. One evening, a week after mediation, we sat across from each other at the dining table. The same table where I had once signed papers without reading carefully, no folders this time, no documents, just silence. I keep thinking about that night, she said. Which part? I asked. The camera. I nodded. I suggested them. Yes. I thought it would make me feel safer. It did, I said. She looked at me. Not the way I meant. No, not the way she meant. If you hadn't checked, she said quietly, I would have left you believing it was mutual. Yes. The word didn't sting anymore, it just existed. I didn't realize how much I needed control, she continued. I thought independence meant protection. And what does it mean now? I asked. She hesitated. I don't know. That was the most honest place she'd stood in a year. I built leverage because I was afraid of disappearing, she said. But I ended up disappearing anyway. I watched her carefully. She wasn't asking for absolution, she wasn't deflecting, she was unpacking. I stopped fighting for you. She added. I stopped seeing the warning signs. I replied. Silence. But this silence wasn't hostile, it was reflective. Do you still see me as the man who was predictable? I asked. She shook her head slowly. No. What do you see? She looked at me for a long time before answering. I see someone I underestimated. That mattered, not because it restored ego, because it restored dignity. Days turned into weeks. We started therapy, not dramatic sessions, not shouting matches, structured conversations. There's something humbling about sitting in a room where a stranger asks you simple questions you avoided for years. Why didn't you tell him you were planning to leave? The therapist asked Linda once. Because I didn't think he'd fight, she answered. And if he had? The therapist asked. Linda looked at me. I would have felt seen. That sentence lingered. I had mistaken calm for connection. She had mistaken planning for power. We were both wrong, but only one of us built a financial exit. One evening, after a long session, we walked home in silence. The sun was setting behind the houses. The neighborhood looked exactly the same as it had the night I installed the cameras. Stable, quiet, predictable. I don't know if we can go back, she said. We can't. I replied. Silence. Then what are we doing? She asked, seeing if there's something new to build. Not restore. Not patch, build. She looked at me differently then, not as provider, not as risk, as equal, but equality without trust is fragile, and rebuilding trust is slow. There were moments when I felt something return, small gestures, shared laughter, an honest apology that didn't contain justification, and there were moments when I felt distance, the memory of spreadsheets, the word liquidity, the modeling of my death as contingency. Some fractures don't disappear, they become part of the structure. One night, months later, I found myself standing beneath the hallway camera again. It was still there, still blinking softly. Linda joined me. You're thinking, she said. Yes. About leaving? No, about what? About who I was before that night. She didn't interrupt. I thought being steady was enough, I continued. I thought providing stability meant I didn't need to ask hard questions. And now? Now I know stability without engagement looks like absence. She nodded slowly, and leverage without trust looks like betrayal. We stood there quietly. I deleted his number, she said. I nodded. That's not the important part, I replied. What is? That you understand why. Silence. I do. she said. I believed her, but belief isn't blind anymore, it's chosen carefully. A year passed. No more legal letters, no more hidden accounts. No more contingency structures. We moved the dining table, rearranged the living room, small changes, not symbolic, just practical. The camera stayed, not because I didn't trust her, because I trusted myself to pay attention now. One evening, as we sat outside watching the sky fade, she said something that surprised me. I don't feel invisible anymore. I looked at her. Why? Because you don't avoid conflict. I almost smiled. I don't avoid clarity. She reached for my hand, not dramatically, not desperately, just gently. I was wrong, she said, I know. And you? I was asleep. She nodded. We didn't declare triumph, we didn't declare forgiveness. We declared awareness, and that was stronger than illusion. Sometimes people ask me how I caught them. They expect something cinematic, something explosive. The truth is simpler: a notification at 3:42 a.m., a small blinking camera, and the decision to look. I caught them on camera, but what mattered more was that I finally saw myself, not predictable, not passive, not a liquidity event. Just a man who stopped being managed, and once you see that clearly, you never go back to sleep. For a while, it almost felt like we had outrun it. The legal storm passed. The money was back where it belonged. The LLC dissolved into paperwork and penalties. David disappeared from our lives with the quiet efficiency of someone who had calculated loss and chosen containment. On the surface, we stabilized, but stabilization isn't restoration, it's maintenance, and maintenance requires effort every day. 6 months after the mediation, Linda and I sat across from each other in therapy again. The question that session wasn't about money, it was about choice. Why did you stay? The therapist asked her. Linda didn't answer immediately. Because he didn't try to destroy me, she said finally. The therapist turned to me. Why didn't you? I thought about that carefully. I wanted my dignity back, I said. Not revenge. Linda looked at me differently when I said that. Maybe she had expected fury. Maybe she had expected punishment. But I had discovered something unexpected in all of it. Revenge would have kept me tied to her betrayal. Dignity set me free. The therapist nodded slowly. And now? Linda swallowed. Now I don't know how to earn back trust. You don't earn it with promises, I said quietly. You earn it with consistency. She nodded, and for a while, she tried. No secrecy. No late-night phone shielding. No unexplained gaps. Transparency became uncomfortable but necessary, but something else had changed too. I was no longer silent. If something felt off, I said it. If I felt distant, I named it. If she withdrew, I didn't assume peace, I asked. That was the real transformation, not strength, presence. One evening, nearly a year after the night I caught them on camera. We had dinner with Mark and Emily again. This time there was no tension under the table, no hidden knowledge, just cautious normalcy. At one point, Mark looked at me and said quietly, "You're different." Yes, I replied, in a good way. I smiled faintly. I'm awake. Emily watched Linda carefully that night, but not with suspicion, with evaluation. Trust had to be rebuilt in more than one direction. After they left, Linda stood in the kitchen, staring at the sink. They don't look at me the same, she said. They shouldn't, I replied. She nodded slowly. I don't look at myself the same either. That mattered more than anything. Guilt fades, but self-awareness changes posture. Weeks later, something happened that forced a deeper truth. I received a letter in the mail, from David's former firm. He had resigned, not publicly disgraced, not criminally charged, but quietly displaced. Consequences, not catastrophic, but permanent. I held the letter for a long time before telling Linda. When I showed her, she didn't look relieved, she looked reflective. He thought he was smarter than everyone, she said quietly. Yes. And he thought you wouldn't fight. Yes. And I thought you wouldn't see. I nodded. We stood there, side by side, not as the couple we once were, but not as enemies either, just two people who had walked too close to collapse and stepped back at the last possible moment. One night, long after therapy had become less frequent, I found myself under the hallway camera again. I reached up and adjusted its angle slightly. Linda watched me. "You still need it?" she asked. "I thought about that. I don't need it for you," I said. "Then for what?" "For me." She didn't understand, so I explained. "It reminds me that attention matters." She was quiet. "I stopped paying attention once," I said. "I won't do that again." She nodded slowly. "I won't build leverage again," she said. That was her version of the promise. Simple, direct, no poetry. And that was enough. But here's the part one haven't told anyone. The real ending didn't come in therapy. It didn't come in mediation. It came one quiet Tuesday morning. I was standing in the kitchen alone, sunlight cutting across the counter, when I realized something unexpected. I wasn't afraid anymore, not of losing her, not of being replaced, not of being modeled as a liquidity event, because I understood something fundamental now. If she ever tried to leave again, I would survive. If the structure cracked again, I would see it. If someone tried to manage me, I would notice. That awareness was freedom. Later that evening, Linda came home from work and stood beside me. "Are we okay?" she asked. I looked at her carefully. "We're honest," I said. She nodded. "Is that enough?" "For now." That's the truth about endings. They're rarely dramatic. They're quiet decisions made repeatedly. We didn't return to what we were. We became something else, less naive, more deliberate. And maybe that's what long marriages really are, not uninterrupted loyalty, but tested foundations that either collapse or reinforce. I caught them on camera, but what changed my life wasn't what I saw. It was what I refused to ignore. And once you stop ignoring, you stop being predictable. You stop being managed, you stop being replaceable, you simply become present, and presence is something no one can leverage against you again. Time didn't erase what happened. It integrated it. That's different. 2 years passed, not in dramatic leaps, but in ordinary Tuesdays, grocery runs, quiet dinners, therapy sessions that slowly became less about crisis and more about communication. We didn't become the couple we were before. We became something more cautious, more verbal, more aware of fault lines. Linda rebuilt trust the only way it can be rebuilt, through repetition. Consistency. Boring honesty, no hidden accounts. No vague explanations. No "trust me." And I rebuilt something too, not trust in her, trust in myself. The real fracture that night wasn't only betrayal, it was that I had stopped checking my own life. I had outsourced awareness. That never happened again. One evening, almost exactly 2 years after the 3:42 a.m. notification, I was in my office reviewing retirement projections, something I now did regularly, not obsessively, responsibly. Linda walked in and leaned against the doorframe. "You still double-check everything," she said. "Yes." "Do you think that will ever stop?" I thought about it. "No," she nodded slowly. "That's fair." There was no resentment in her voice, just acceptance. Because this was the cost, not punishment, consequence. Later that week, we had a conversation we had avoided for months. What if we hadn't been caught? She asked quietly. I looked at her. "You would have left." "Yes." "And I would have believed it was mutual." "Yes." Silence settled between us. "I'm grateful you checked," she whispered. "So was I, not because it saved the marriage, because it saved me from illusion. An illusion is far more dangerous than betrayal." There's something else that changed after all of this. I stopped avoiding conflict outside my marriage too, with friends, with family, with myself. When something felt off, I addressed it. When something needed clarity, I asked. Predictability had been my shield, presence became my strength. One afternoon, I ran into David unexpectedly, at a gas station of all places. He looked older, less polished, not ruined. Just diminished. He froze when he saw me. For a moment, neither of us spoke, then he nodded once. "Thomas." "David." Silence. He shifted his weight slightly. "You look well," he said. "I am." Another pause. He studied my face, maybe looking for resentment. He didn't find it. "You handled it strategically," he said quietly. "I handled it clearly." He almost smiled. "I misjudged you." "Yes." Silence. Then he said something I hadn't expected. "I misjudged her too." That didn't surprise me, because the moment she chose truth over leverage, she stopped being useful to him. We didn't shake hands, we didn't reconcile, we simply acknowledged what had happened and what it had cost. And then we walked away. When I got home, Linda was in the kitchen. I saw him, I said. She stiffened slightly. Where? Gas station. Silence. What did he say? That he misjudged us. She let out a slow breath. He misjudged himself, she said. Maybe, but that wasn't my concern anymore. That night, I stood beneath the hallway camera again. It was still there, still blinking, not because I suspected anything, because it had become a symbol, not of surveillance, of awareness. Linda joined me. You still look at it like it's sacred, she said softly. In a way, it is. She smiled faintly. It exposed me. It exposed both of us. She nodded slowly. Do you forgive me? She asked. That question had changed meaning over time. At first, it was about erasing consequence. Now, it was about understanding. I don't relive it, I said. That's not the same. No, I agreed. It's not. Silence. Then I added, I don't see you as my enemy. Her eyes softened. That's enough, she whispered. And maybe it was, because forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's deciding not to weaponize memory. We never returned to innocence, but we gained awareness. And awareness, though heavier, is stronger. Sometimes I think about that night, about the notification, about how close I came to ignoring it. If I had rolled over and gone back to sleep, my life would have split quietly. And I would have blamed fate. Instead, I chose to look, and that choice changed everything. I caught them on camera, but the real story isn't about what I saw, it's about what I did after. I stopped being passive, I stopped assuming stability meant safety, I stopped mistaking silence for peace, I became present, and presence is something no one can leverage, no one can model, no one can manage, not again. If this story means anything, it's this: don't wait for collapse to pay attention. Look at your own life before someone else reframes it, ask hard questions before someone else structures answers, and if you ever hear that quiet notification at 3:42 a.m., don't ignore it. Because sometimes the smallest blinking light reveals the biggest truth, and once you see clearly, you never go back to being predictable again. 3 years passed, not in dramatic leaps. Not in grand reconciliations, just in ordinary mornings, coffee, bills, therapy tapering off, occasional tension, occasional laughter. What surprised me most wasn't that we survived, it was that survival didn't feel triumphant, it felt earned. Linda never tried to erase what happened. She didn't say that was another version of me. She didn't blame midlife, loneliness, or fear anymore. She owned it, fully, and ownership changes posture. There was one evening that marked the real turning point, not legally, not emotionally, but structurally. We were sitting outside, late summer air warm, cicadas humming. She looked at me and said something simple: I don't want protection from you anymore. I waited. I want partnership, she added. That word used to feel automatic, now it felt deliberate. What does partnership mean to you? I asked. It means I don't build exits in my head, she said. Even when I'm scared. That was the core of it. Fear hadn't destroyed us, secret contingency had. I nodded slowly. And partnership for me, I said, means I don't disappear into silence. She smiled faintly. You don't anymore. No, I didn't. The predictable man who avoided conflict to preserve calm was gone. In his place was someone steady, but vocal, calm, but alert, loving, but not blind. We weren't dramatic about healing, no symbolic renewal ceremonies. No declarations of stronger than ever. We were simply more honest, and honesty is less glamorous than romance, but it's stronger. One afternoon, I removed the hallway camera, not because I no longer valued awareness, but because I no longer needed a device to remind me to look. Linda watched me take it down. Why now? She asked. Because I don't need a lens to pay attention anymore. She nodded. That's a risk. Yes. But it's mutual. That was the difference, mutual. We had rebuilt without leverage. Without hidden structures, without contingency language. We still disagreed sometimes, we still frustrated each other, but disagreements were spoken, not engineered, and here's the truth I didn't understand at 60, betrayal doesn't always end a marriage, silence does, leverage does, control does, but exposure, painful, humiliating, devastating exposure, can either shatter or purify, for us. It purified something, not innocence, awareness. Years later, when people ask about retirement, I tell them something different than I used to. I don't talk about savings or equity, I talk about attention, because the most expensive thing I almost lost wasn't money, it was agency. The right to stand inside my own life and not be managed. Linda once asked me, years after everything, if that night never happened, would you still be asleep? I thought about it honestly. Yes, I said. She nodded. Then maybe the worst thing we did saved us. I don't know if I'd phrase it that way, but I understand what she meant. I caught them on camera, but what that camera really did was this: it forced me to look, not just at her, not just at David, at myself, at where I had withdrawn, at where I had assumed too much, at where I mistook stability for connection. I don't glorify what happened, I don't minimize it either. It was betrayal, it was structured. It was calculated, but it also became a mirror, and I chose to look. That choice is what saved me, not the legal filings, not the mediation, not even the return money, the choice to stop being predictable, to stop being passive, to stop outsourcing awareness. That was the transformation. Today, at 63, I'm not the man I was. I'm steadier, clearer, less afraid of conflict, less impressed by quiet, and deeply aware that love without attention is fragile. If you've listened this far, if you've walked through this story with me, remember this: security isn't found in silence, trust isn't proven by blindness, and stability without engagement is just slow drift. The night I caught them on camera, I thought my life was ending. It wasn't, it was beginning again, with my eyes open. There's one more part of this story I rarely tell, not because it's dramatic, because it's quiet. About 4 years after that night, I found myself alone in the house for a weekend. Linda had gone to visit Emily out of state. Mark was busy with work. The neighborhood was still the same, predictable, orderly, calm. I walked through the hallway where the camera used to blink. There was a faint mark on the wall where it had been mounted. You could still see the outline if the light hit it just right. I stood there longer than I expected, not reliving, reflecting. If that camera had never existed, I would have lost more than money. I would have lost narrative control of my own life. That's what people misunderstand about betrayal. It's not just about the act, it's about the story being rewritten without your consent. And I almost signed off on a version of my life that wasn't true. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. The house was quiet, but not heavy. There was no paranoia left, no checking of phones, no suspicion, just awareness. That's the difference. When Linda came home 2 days later, she found me in the yard trimming hedges. "You look peaceful," she said. "I am." She studied me for a moment. "Do you ever regret not pushing it criminally?" She asked. Honest question. "No," I said. "Why?" "Because I didn't want my identity tied to destruction." She nodded slowly. "You could have ruined him." "Yes." "And maybe me." "Yes." Silence. "But that wouldn't have rebuilt me," I added. "That was the truth I didn't understand at the beginning. Justice can be necessary, but vengeance is adhesive. It keeps you stuck to the event. I didn't want to live the rest of my life defined by what they did. I wanted to live defined by how I responded." That was the shift. A year later, we sold the house, not because of bad memories, because it was time. The market was strong. The kids were independent. The rooms felt larger than we needed. As we packed boxes, I found the original camera in a drawer. I held it in my hand for a long time. Linda noticed. "You keeping it?" she asked. I thought about that. "No." "Throwing it away?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I don't need proof anymore." She didn't respond, but she understood. We moved into a smaller place across town, not a fresh start, a deliberate continuation, different walls, same people, more honest structure. One evening in the new house, she sat across from me and asked something unexpected. If it had ended that year, would you have been okay? I didn't rush the answer. "Yes," I said finally. She absorbed that. "That's not easy to hear." "I don't say it to hurt you," I replied. I say it because it's true. And that truth changed everything. I didn't stay because I couldn't leave, I stayed because I chose to, and choice is power. She reached across the table and took my hand. I choose you, she said quietly, not dramatically, not desperately, deliberately. That's what partnership looks like after fracture, not blind loyalty, conscious alignment. Now, at 64, I look back at that night differently. I no longer see it as the worst moment of my life, I see it as the moment I woke up. I caught them on camera, but what I really caught was the version of myself that had drifted too far into comfort. I caught the assumption that stability equals safety, I caught the illusion that love doesn't require maintenance, I caught the quiet withdrawal I had mistaken for peace, and I corrected it. That's the ending, not fireworks, not perfect redemption, not cinematic reconciliation, just two people who nearly collapsed under the weight of secrecy, and decided to live without it. If you've listened this far, here's what I'll leave you with. Pay attention before you're forced to speak. Before you're replaced, check the quiet spaces in your life, and if something feels off, look, because sometimes the smallest signal isn't a warning of loss, it's an invitation to wake up. And waking up, even at 60, is never too late. There is something about getting older that makes the truth easier to carry, not lighter, just clearer. At 65, I no longer tell this story with tension in my chest. I tell it with perspective. People still ask me, how did you know? They expect some instinct, some dramatic confrontation. The truth is painfully simple. I checked, that's it, I checked. Most people don't, they feel something off and silence it. They sense distance and rationalize it. They notice small shifts and call it stress. I did that for years, until one night, I didn't, and that decision didn't just expose betrayal, it exposed my own passivity. There's a part of this story I haven't said plainly yet. Even if Linda had left, even if the marriage had ended, even if I had been alone at 60, I would have been okay. That's the real transformation, not that we survived, not that she changed, that I realized I didn't need to be managed to be loved, I didn't need to avoid conflict to keep stability, I didn't need to be predictable to be worthy. That understanding gave me something no document ever could, agency. Linda once told me, years later, I was terrified of disappearing. I understand that now, but disappearing doesn't happen because someone leaves, it happens because you stop standing, and I had stopped standing long before she built her exit. Now, when something feels off, I don't shrink. When something needs clarity, I ask. When something hurts, I say it. That's what changed. And here's the part that may surprise you. Our marriage today isn't perfect, it's better, not softer, stronger, because it's built without illusion. We don't assume loyalty, we practice it. We don't assume connection, we maintain it. We don't avoid hard conversations, we initiate them. Sometimes people ask Linda how she lives with what she did. She answers honestly, I live with it by never pretending it didn't happen. That's accountability, not shame, accountability. And me, I live with it by remembering who I became because of it. Not bitter, not paranoid, present. There's a photograph on my desk now. It's not from our wedding, it's not from a vacation, it's from a random Tuesday afternoon, taken by Emily without us noticing. Linda and I are sitting at the kitchen table, talking, nothing dramatic, just conversation. When I look at that photo, I don't see a couple that survived betrayal, I see two people who learned to stop managing fear with silence. And that's the real ending. I caught them on camera. But what that camera really did was expose a quiet truth. You can't control whether someone chooses you, you can only control whether you choose yourself. That night at 3:42 a.m., I chose to look. And that choice, not the confrontation, not the mediation, not the legal filings, is what changed my life. If there's anything you take from my story, let it be this: pay attention, ask questions, don't build exits in secret, don't avoid conflict in the name of peace, and never allow yourself to become a footnote in your own life. Because once you stop being predictable, once you stop being managed, once you stand fully inside your own clarity, you don't fear losing everything, you simply refuse to lose yourself. That's how it ends, not with revenge, not with perfection, with awareness. And awareness, at 65, is worth more than any liquidity event ever could be. There is one final truth I came to understand, and it didn't arrive in court or therapy or mediation. It arrived quietly. One early morning, long after everything had settled, I woke up at 3:42 a.m., the same time. For a moment, my heart raced out of habit. Memory is strange like that. Your body remembers before your mind does. I lay there in the dark and listened. No notification, no alert, no betrayal waiting behind a blinking light, just silence. Linda shifted beside me and murmured something in her sleep. Ordinary. Human. Unscripted. And that's when it hit me. The real victory wasn't that I caught them. It wasn't that I rebuilt the marriage. It wasn't that I protected the assets. It was that I no longer feared looking. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. No alerts. I didn't even check the security app, because there was no camera anymore, and I didn't need one. I lay back down and let the quiet exist without suspicion. That was freedom. Years earlier, silence meant something was being hidden. Now silence meant peace. There's a difference between blind trust and conscious trust. Blind trust ignores. Conscious trust observes, and still chooses. I choose her, not because I have to, not because I'm afraid of being alone, not because we erased what happened. I choose her because we rebuilt without leverage, and she chooses me without contingency. If tomorrow something fractured again, I would face it. If tomorrow she walked away, I would survive it. That knowledge makes love cleaner, less desperate, less fearful, more deliberate. At 65, I understand something I didn't at 60. Stability isn't about everything staying intact, it's about knowing you can stand even when it doesn't. That night years ago, I thought I had lost control. In reality, I gained it. I caught them on camera, but what I really caught was the moment I stopped outsourcing responsibility for my own awareness. That moment changed me more than betrayal ever could. If you've stayed with me through this story, through the anger and the legal unraveling and the rebuilding, then let me leave you with this: don't fear clarity, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts, because clarity doesn't destroy stable things, it only destroys illusions, and illusions are expensive, sometimes financially, always emotionally. I no longer measure my life by what almost happened, I measure it by what I refuse to ignore, and every night now, when I turn off the lights and the house settles into that deep, ordinary quiet, I don't wonder what I'm missing. I know I'm present, and presence is something no one can take from you. Not again. That's how it truly ends. Not with a camera, not with confrontation, not even with forgiveness, but with a man who chose to wake up and stayed awake. You would think that after everything I've told you, there wouldn't be anything left, but endings are rarely single moments. They're realizations that arrive quietly, sometimes years later. I'm 66 now, retired in the true sense of the word, not just from work, but from pretending. Linda and I sit on the back porch most evenings. The world is slower. Conversations are simpler. There's less performance in both of us. Last winter, she asked me something I hadn't expected. If it happened again, she said carefully, would you check? I smiled, yes. She nodded, good. That answer didn't offend her, it reassured her, because checking no longer means suspicion. It means engagement. That's the final transformation: attention without paranoia, trust without blindness, love without leverage. There's one more truth I haven't said clearly. The night I caught them on camera, I thought I had lost power. In reality, that was the first night in years I used it, not to control, not to intimidate, not to punish, but to see. Most men my age fear being replaced, fear irrelevance, fear invisibility, fear that stability makes them disposable. I felt that fear for a brief moment, but fear only controls you if you don't face it. The second I decided to look, really look, I stopped being disposable, not because she couldn't leave, but because I wouldn't abandon myself again. That's the difference. Linda once told me, you became dangerous after that night. I asked her what she meant. You stopped being predictable, she said, and she was right. Not unpredictable in anger, not volatile, not reckless, unpredictable in one simple way: I was no longer willing to ignore truth to preserve comfort. That's power, and power doesn't have to shout, it just stands. If you're listening to this and you think this story is about betrayal, you're only half right. It's about awareness. If you think it's about revenge, you're wrong. It's about dignity. If you think it's about saving a marriage, maybe, but more than that. It's about saving yourself inside it. I caught them on camera, But cameras don't save marriages. People who decide to stop drifting do. Years later, I don't check for notifications at night. I don't scan bank accounts obsessively. I don't watch for signs. Because awareness has become habit, and habit becomes peace. Sometimes I walk past the place where that first camera hung. The wall has been repainted. There's no mark anymore. But I remember exactly where it was, and I'm grateful for it, not because it exposed her, because it exposed me, exposed the version of myself that had gone quiet, that had assumed too much, that had stopped asking. That version is gone now. In his place is someone steadier, someone who understands that love without presence fades, that silence isn't safety, that leverage is poison, and that clarity, even when it shatters your world at 3:42 a.m., is a gift. So here's the real ending. I didn't win, she didn't lose, we didn't defeat anyone, we grew up, late, painfully, imperfectly. And I became the kind of man who doesn't need a camera to know what's happening in his own house. That's enough, that's everything, and that is where this story finally rests. There is one last thing, not a twist. Not a revelation, a choice. A few months ago, Mark asked me to speak to a group of young men at his company. Leadership retreat. Resilience, he called it. I almost laughed. If you had told 60-year-old me that one day I'd stand in front of 30-year-olds and talk about resilience, I would have said you were confused. But I went. I didn't tell them everything. I didn't tell them about the kiss on the couch or the LLC or the insurance routing. I told them something simpler. I said, there will be a moment in your life when you sense something is off. In your marriage. In your business. In yourself. And you will have two options. Ignore it to preserve comfort. Or look at it and risk disruption. They were quiet. I told them I chose to look, and that looking cost me sleep, pride, certainty, but it gave me something far more valuable, self-respect. Afterward, one of them came up to me. What if looking destroys everything? He asked. I thought about that carefully. Then at least you won't be living inside a lie, I said. That's the final truth. Not every story ends like mine, not every marriage rebuilds, some should not. If Linda had chosen differently that day in mediation, I would have walked away, and I would have been okay. That's the part one couldn't understand at 60. Love is strongest when it's chosen freely, not from fear of being alone. One night recently, Linda and I were sitting in the living room. No television. No phones. Just quiet. She looked at me and said, "You don't watch me the way you used to." There was no accusation in her voice. What way? I asked. Like you're checking for cracks. I smiled faintly. I'm not checking for cracks, I said. I'm checking in. She nodded. That's the difference. Surveillance watches for failure, presence watches for connection. Years ago, I needed a camera to wake me up. Now I don't. If there's anything left to say, this is it. The night I caught them on camera didn't define my life. The morning after did, because that's when I chose who I would become, bitter or aware, reactive or deliberate, broken or rebuilt. I chose aware, I chose deliberate. I chose rebuilt, and I chose to never again let comfort silence instinct. If you're listening to this and you feel that quiet nudge, that small, blinking light in your own life, don't dismiss it. Ask, look, engage, not because you expect betrayal, but because you deserve clarity. I'm 66 now. I don't fear being replaced. I don't fear being alone. I don't fear looking, and that's the greatest freedom I've ever known. That's where it truly ends, not with betrayal, not with revenge, not even with reconciliation, but with a man who learned, late but fully, that staying awake is the most powerful thing you can do. There's nothing dramatic left to reveal. No hidden bank accounts, no secret messages, no final confession waiting in the shadows, but there is something worth saying. A few weeks ago, I was cleaning out old digital files. I found the original security footage, the clip from that night. I had kept it all these years, archived in a folder I rarely opened. I sat there for a long time staring at the file name, 3_42_am_living_room.mp4. I hadn't watched it since the mediation, not because I was afraid, because I didn't need to, but this time, I clicked it, the image appeared. Grainy. Quiet. The living room exactly as it was. The couch. The lamp. The hallway, and then the moment, two people leaning too close, a decision already made. A structure already built. I expected anger, it didn't come. I expected pain, it didn't come either. What came instead was distance, not emotional distance, perspective. I watched that man on the screen, myself, asleep upstairs, unaware, and I didn't feel foolish, I felt human. Trust isn't stupidity, it's vulnerability, and vulnerability isn't weakness, it's courage without guarantees. I closed the file. Then I deleted it, not out of denial, out of completion. Linda was in the kitchen when I walked in. I deleted it, I said. She froze slightly. The footage? Yes. Silence. You're sure? She asked softly. Yes. She studied me carefully. Why now? Because I don't need evidence to remember who I became. That was the truth. The footage had served its purpose. It had woken me up. I didn't need to replay it to stay awake. That night, as we turned off the lights, she said something that stayed with me. You never weaponized that video. No, I said, you could have. Yes. Silence. Thank you, she whispered. I didn't respond right away, because it wasn't about mercy, it was about identity. I didn't want to be a man who held proof like a knife, I wanted to be a man who stood without it. There's a kind of strength that comes from winning, and there's a different kind that comes from restraint. I chose restraint. Not because I was weak, because I was done proving anything. At 67 now, I look back and understand something clearly. That night wasn't the worst thing that ever happened to me, it was the clearest. It stripped illusion, it exposed complacency, it forced confrontation, and confrontation built character. Linda once told me, you became impossible to manipulate after that. She meant it half jokingly, but she was right, not because I became suspicious, because I became present, and presence is unmanageable. If I could speak to the man I was at 60, lying in bed before that notification came in, I wouldn't warn him, I wouldn't tell him to install cameras sooner. Or to check accounts more carefully, or to suspect sooner. I would tell him one thing, stay awake, not just for betrayal, for yourself, for your own drift, for your own silence, for the places you withdraw without noticing, because the real danger isn't someone building an exit, it's you falling asleep inside your own life. I caught them on camera, but the story was never about them, it was about me choosing to see. And once you truly see, you don't go back to sleep. That's the final page, not explosive, not tragic, not triumphant, just clear, and clarity, at 67, is worth everything. There's something people don't tell you about surviving something like this. The world keeps moving, bills still come, groceries still need buying, the lawn still grows, the seasons still turn, and at some point, your story stops being the thing that happened and starts being the thing that shaped you. I'm 68 now, we've downsized again, a smaller house, fewer rooms, fewer things. Simpler. Intentional. Sometimes I sit in the living room in the late afternoon, sunlight cutting across the floor, and I think about how close I came to living the rest of my life inside a quiet lie, not because she didn't love me, not because I was weak, but because comfort had dulled my attention. That's what almost cost me everything. Comfort. Linda walked in on me one day while I was looking out the window. You're thinking about it again, she said. Not the way you think, I replied. Then how? I'm thinking about how easy it is to drift. She nodded slowly. We both did. Yes, that's the part we rarely say out loud. She drifted into contingency. I drifted into silence. Both are forms of escape, but only one was documented in spreadsheets. Over the years, we've had the same conversation in different forms. Why didn't you fight for me sooner? She once asked. I thought peace was enough, I said, and it wasn't. No, peace without engagement is just quiet distance. I understand that now. A few months ago, Mark asked me something unexpected. Dad, if you could go back and stop it from happening, would you? I didn't answer immediately, because that question carries weight. Finally, I said, no. He looked surprised. Why? Because I wouldn't be who I am now. And that's the truth. The man I am today isn't afraid of difficult conversations, he doesn't hide behind calm, he doesn't confuse predictability with strength, he checks in, he speaks up, he pays attention, and he doesn't outsource awareness. That's the transformation. not from victim to victor, from passive to present. Linda once said something that stayed with me: "You don't look for cracks anymore." She was right. I don't look for cracks, I look for connection. If something feels distant, I say it. If something feels off, I ask. If something hurts, I name it. There's no need for cameras when there's communication. The last time this story came up was at our anniversary dinner, 36 years. That number once felt fragile, now it feels earned. She raised her glass and said, "To honesty." I raised mine and said, "To attention." Because honesty without attention fades, and attention without honesty becomes surveillance. We learned the difference the hard way. There is no dramatic ending left, no hidden twist, no final confession, no secret child, no surprise collapse, just two older people who understand that love is maintenance, that clarity hurts before it heals. That silence can be as dangerous as betrayal, and that waking up late is still better than never waking up at all. I caught them on camera, but what I really caught was the moment I stopped drifting, and that moment didn't just save my marriage, it saved me. That's the last truth I have to give you. If you're waiting for something bigger, something louder, something cinematic, this isn't that kind of story. This is the kind where a man wakes up at 3:42 a.m., looks at a screen, and decides not to go back to sleep, and sometimes, that's enough. You'd think there's nothing left after that, but there is one final layer, not about Linda, not about David, not about the money. About time. When you reach this stage of life, you start counting differently. Not years ahead, but years behind. You measure what shaped you, what defined you, what almost broke you, and that night, 3:42 a.m., sits like a hinge in my memory. Before it, I was a man who believed stability guaranteed safety. After it, I was a man who understood that awareness guarantees dignity. That's the real divide. Last spring, I had a minor health scare. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to sit in a hospital room and stare at white ceilings for a few hours. Linda sat beside me, quiet, not dramatic, not panicked, just present. At one point she reached over and squeezed my hand and said, "I'm glad you looked." It wasn't about the camera, it was about everything. If I hadn't looked that night, if I had chosen comfort over clarity, if I had let the structure finalize quietly, I would have entered that hospital room as a man who had been managed out of his own life. Instead, I was sitting there as someone who chose to stand up when it mattered. That realization settled deeper than any fear. We don't control everything. We don't prevent every betrayal, we don't guarantee every ending, but we can choose whether we stay asleep. That's it, that's the whole lesson. A few weeks after that hospital visit, I found myself awake again at 3:42 a.m., the house was still. Linda was asleep, the world quiet. I didn't reach for my phone this time, I didn't need to. I just lay there and felt something simple: peace, not ignorance, not avoidance, not blind trust, peace that comes from knowing you will look if you need to, peace that comes from knowing you can survive what you see, peace that comes from no longer being afraid of clarity. That's where the story truly closes. Not in betrayal, not in revenge, not even in reconciliation, but in awareness. That remains long after the crisis fades. I caught them on camera, but what that night really did was give me a gift I didn't know I needed: the courage to see my own life clearly. And once you have that, you don't lose it, you carry it, quietly, steadily, for the rest of your years. That's the end, and this time, it's not dramatic, it's simply true.